today. We have Mrs. M. Wright for Mr. Richardson. We have Mr. Kaufman for Mr. Charlesworth. And we have Mr. Crooks in place of Mr. Bill. Right, I propose that the minutes of the last meeting held on the 12th of September are taken as read and that you're happy I sign them.
Yes.
All agreed?
Yes.
Okay. Question time. I've not received any questions. And similarly on item 3, I've not received any questions from members of the council. Item 4, there are no urgent items today. And item 5, declarations in respect of items on the agenda today. Do we have any declarations? Now, I'm going to assume, bearing in mind the strategic growth plan and the relationship with the district planning authorities, that we all wish to declare a non-pecuniary interest on that. So we'll do that automatically, so you don't need to do that individually. Are there any other interests?
Just as Chairman of MAG, again, a non-pecuniary interest. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that. Terry?
Thank you, Chair. Item 10, the annual performance report, non-pecuniary interest, page 207, Carillon Hermitage FM is mentioned. I'm a volunteer there. And on page 210, Colville Heritage Society is mentioned, and I'm a member of that.
Okay. Just while we're doing interests, do you think we ought to do a blanket one on the planning obligations?
Yes.
One as well. Would you advise?
Well, through you, Chairman, I think there's. Don't forget, scrutiny doesn't make decisions, although it's very, very important. But there's no harm, just for the record, in making an appropriate declaration. So if anyone did have a query, it was quite clear that members were aware of their rights and responsibilities.
Okay, so should we do that as well for that one, bearing in mind it's in relation to Section 106 agreements? Okay, thank you. Presentation of petitions. There are none. Item 7. Oh, sorry, I've missed declarations of the party whip. Are there any declarations? Party whip? No. Okay. As I said, I've not received any petitions. So that takes us to item 8, which is the strategic growth plan. Now, if we could have the relevant officers up to the table. You haven't all got nameplates. Oh, Ian has. Tom has. The other two, would you like to introduce yourselves and say what department you're from?
Good morning, Chairman. I'm Dave Nash. I'm the interim Joint Strategic Planning Manager. I've taken over on a temporary basis from Pat Willoughby, who many of you will have met before.
Hello, I'm Caroline Boucher. I'm Head of Business Intelligence and Economic Growth at Leicestershire County Council. I work for Tom.
Okay, thank you. Ian?
Chair, can I give my apologies in case my phone goes off? I am on call this week, so I have got my phone on me and I may have to leave.
Right.
Thank you.
Okay.
Hopefully not.
Right, so thanks for that. So we're going to do with item 8 then, which is the strategic growth plan. Now, we'll just remind members of the submissions that have been received from the CPRE. There are 2, just to check that you're aware. There was a fairly substantial document with also a number of tables about housing mythology, and then in the last day or 2 there's been a second addendum in relation to the housing figures, the housing projections. So I'm assuming that all members have seen those and have had a chance to have a look at them. There are members of CPRE joined us today, so I would welcome them in the gallery. Members will also be aware that there was an all-member briefing on this around about the 12th of September, and we're really here today to look at the outcome of the consultation process and what's going to happen next and the way forward. Now, who would like to kick off with an introduction? Tom.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I'll say some introductory words and then hand over to Dave, who will give the presentation, which you can see on the screen. This report provides the Commission with the opportunity to consider the proposed final strategic growth plan before it's considered by Cabinet on the 23rd of November. As Commission members will be aware, the process of preparing the growth plan has been a long one, dating back really to 2015, and the Commission has considered the plan at several of its previous meetings. Paras 2 to 9 of the report summarise the route the plan and associated documents have taken through the Council's decision-making processes, including consideration by the Commission in June 2016, March 2017 and February of this year. And in February, the Commission considered the draft SGP during the consultation period, and the generally supportive view of the Commission at that time is summarised at paragraph 8 of the report. There have also been 4 all-member briefings, most recently in September, as Mr Wilson said. The report sets out the background to the SGP and in particular summarises the approach taken and the key elements of the plan. Those are in paras 16 to 25, and paras 26 to 29 summarise the public consultation exercise undertaken. Dave will talk about those aspects in a bit more detail in a moment. The proposed plan is attached as Appendix A, with Appendix B summarising the key changes made following the consultation exercise. The plan is, of course, a collaborative effort of the 9 local authorities and the LEP, overseen by the Members' Advisory Group, which, as was referred to earlier, Mr Pendleton chaired. And I'm sure you're aware that the other partners are considering the plan almost as we speak. It's been to some meetings of district councils and the City Council, and it's due to go to others as well, with the final meeting, I think it's around about the 10th or 12th of December. So at that point, if all goes to plan, the growth plan will have been signed off with all the authorities, although that's obviously subject to the decision taken at each of those councils. It is a key piece of work that does 2 things. First, 2 key things. Firstly, it does demonstrate that the authorities are fulfilling their duty to cooperate on strategic cross-boundary issues in Leicester and Leicestershire. But perhaps more importantly than that, it is a key document to help the area plan effectively for its future. And I think it's generally recognised that Leicester and Leicestershire is ahead of the game with respect to this type of work at a national level. And there is much interest from central government and agencies like Homes England in this piece of work. And we think this can only put the area in a strong position regarding future funding to support growth. And as a result of that, we've been approached by Homes England to discuss with them how they can support us to deliver housing. So Ian, myself and other colleagues are talking to them about our housing infrastructure fund bids and other funding opportunities in the future. And that, of course, marks the transition from the approval of the plan, which is hoped to happen later this year, and moving into the delivery of the plan. So I'll leave it there and hand over to Dave.
Thank you. Chairman, just by way of introduction, I'd like to say that I'm conscious that this is a fairly long presentation. It's been put together to meet the needs of various different audiences, and I think the audience today will be fairly familiar with some of the slides. So I will gloss over some slides where I think that's appropriate, but please, if anybody does not understand something or wishes to ask me a question, just indicate it and stop me if that's what you would normally do in these meetings. I'm also aware, as you already referred to, Chairman, that there has been a briefing meeting for all members on the consultation process, so I'm conscious that there is a good degree of knowledge of this plan and its process in the room. This first slide I can gloss over because I'm sure it's well known to people here today who the partners are preparing this plan and what the background governance procedures are in terms of a group of officers leading the process at a strategic level, reporting to the Members' Advisory Group, chaired by Councillor Pendleton, and decision-making staying with all the individual organisations who all need to support the plan before it can be properly endorsed. Some of the key activities behind the process, again, these have been referred to in your report largely, so I'll be fairly brief on these. With the abolition of the regional spatial strategy back in 2015-16, it was clear to Leicester and Leicestershire authorities that there needed to be a new approach to strategic planning. There was therefore the formation of this partnership and the publication of the strategic growth statement, which essentially sort of set out the need for a long-term approach and scoped the likely content of the plan which was going to be produced. That led on to early in 2017 the preparation of the Hedner document, which is a key piece of evidence which sets out the requirements for housing and employment land needs through to 2031 and 2036. As a result of that, there was a joint statement of cooperation between the authorities and a recognition that possibly, based on the figures that came out then, certainly Leicester City and possibly Oadby and Wigston councils would not be able to meet their housing needs within their own areas, and discussions started about what the response to that might need to be. Work continued obviously during 2017 to the point where there was a consultation draft plan considered by the members' advisory group towards the end of that year, along with a revised statement of cooperation, and that led to the adoption of a consultation draft document by the individual authorities through their governance processes, and it was agreed that we should go out and consult on that document. There was a fairly lengthy process of consultation, much longer than most consultations would take, I think, but there were reasons behind that because new evidence was becoming available and being added. The consultation ran from January through to early May, and at your meeting in February of this year, you considered that consultation document and made recommendations through to your Cabinet. The feedback from the consultation process was considered by the partnership across the summer. There was an updated work in progress plan which was considered on an informal basis by all the partners and contained some suggested possible changes and revisions to the plan to respond to the feedback we'd received from the consultation. That following further feedback from the individual authorities over the summer led to, in September, a revised plan going back to the members' advisory group, and that plan was endorsed by them. So this is the plan we're considering today, the final plan which is going through the governance processes and which hopefully will be in a position come December where it's been endorsed by all the partners. In a bit more detail, what happened during that 4-month consultation process? Well, as you can see from this slide, partners made some fairly significant attempts to raise the profile and to raise public interest in the plan. We achieved some pretty good media coverage. There were public exhibitions right across the whole of the county. Leaflets were made widely available, and the response was repeatedly pushed out via social media. What was the outcome of all that work? The outcome was 588 responses. Now, maybe that doesn't seem like a huge number, but if you look at this type of document and go back to the sort of plans that we produced strategically 15, 20, 25 years ago, it's actually probably in line and perhaps even slightly higher than we normally would expect for this strategic type of document. So it's not a great response, but it's not out of type with the level of response one might expect. The responses were probably boosted actually by two things which were going on at the time, which clearly prompted people to reply to the consultation. One was that the strategic rail freight infrastructure proposals for what's now known as the Hinckley National had just emerged, and people in that particular area were obviously exercised by that and used the opportunity of this consultation to make their comments known. And secondly, there was clearly a fairly concerted effort, understandably so, to promote representations on the A46 expressway plans, because we all know that that is a contentious proposal. So a lot of the responses that came in were off the back of those particular two issues which were particularly prevalent at the time. What did the responses say? Well, we've broken that down into a few slides which look generically at different areas and what views were expressed. As always, with the planning consultation, the view was expressed that the area is already overdeveloped. I think that's a fairly standard thing that we expect people to say. But also there were, interestingly, some polarised views on the approach which should be taken generally. Some people saying that small-scale brownfield needed to have a greater emphasis, but also many people saying that they saw the value of proposals for new settlements. And there was a pretty consistent message, I think, that there was opposition to more of the same, more of what we've experienced over the last 10 to 15 years, where many towns and smaller villages have faced estate-based development on the edge of the area, which has not necessarily brought the infrastructure which may have been required. And I think that there's a consistent message from people that they would like us to adopt an approach which doesn't rely on that being continued into the future. Part of the reason for that would clearly be that there is perceived to have been some damage to the countryside, and the feedback again in terms of this plan was more growth will mean more damage to the countryside. The impact on villages and rural areas was felt to be important, and therefore the feedback was environmental considerations should be a higher priority within the plan, the more emphasis on environmentally friendly alternatives. Turning specifically to the housing employment proposals, again comments that there was too much housing proposed in villages and rural areas. Concerns about the robustness of the projections through to 2050, which we'll talk about more later, I'm sure. Some comments on what type of housing might be needed in the future, particular emphasis on affordability and on low carbon. In terms of employment, views very much opposed to any more big logistics warehousing around Lutterworth or anywhere else for that matter, against the view being expressed by some that there is a national shortage of warehousing, distribution, floor space, and that this area is an obvious place to provide more. So both ends were coming through there. In terms of transportation, there was felt generically to be too much emphasis on car travel and on new roads, and a feeling that there should be stronger messages about improving other options, public transport, lack of sustainability travel proposals in the plan. People were looking for more on that side of things. On other matters, some people had clearly expected much more detail than is ever likely to be included in a plan of this nature, which is highly strategic and looking over 30 plus years. It can only be a higher level plan. It can't contain the amount of detail that people were looking for to reassure them about what will the impact be on me. Some people felt there were gaps in the provision, but this is probably local plan territory on the whole rather than something for this particular plan. But there was clearly a recognition finally of the importance of digital connectivity, and a message again coming back to us, you should say more about that in your final document. On individual areas which are proposed for growth, the A46 Expressway, you can see there on the slide the sort of comments that came back on that one. In terms of the city itself, there's clearly concern from some people who responded to the consultation from within the city boundaries that they are facing overcrowded conditions and that may worsen. And that is really something which we have to contrast with the views expected from people like CPRE and others, where the emphasis is on more growth in the urban areas and protecting green fields. Within the city, again, there were comments about public transport provision, the importance of that, and also a number of comments about how they felt it was really important to maintain good links out to open countryside from the city. The draft plan had within it proposals for gateways north and south of the county and for key centres at Lutterworth and Melton Mowbray. In terms of the northern gateway, most of the feedback was giving the message that we see the sense of proposing more housing in this area, given the economic prospects, HS2, the airport, the SFRI, as well as the impact of Loughborough itself, Loughborough University, the enterprise zone. Less clear-cut about the southern gateway proposals, concern about growth in the south, particularly I think in terms of would that add yet further congestion to the A5, a long-term thorn in our side which is still not being sorted out. The key centres, Melton Mowbray, mainly positive comments about growth there, although some concerns about its relative remoteness, but far more concerns about additional growth at Lutterworth. And the message there really was, we know we're going to get some growth through the Harborough local plan that's coming forward, but can we please leave any further growth to be sorted out through the local plan process rather than identified in this strategic plan. Finally, in terms of the feedback, very supportive comments from people about the need to protect the role of the existing market towns and for there to be managed growth in those locations, and also supportive comments about only allowing more moderate growth in the rural areas than has been coming about in recent times. So, as a result of all that feedback, a number of changes have been made to the plan, and those changes are detailed in Appendix 2 to the report, which you've got in front of you. But in summary, they are as follows. There is a greater emphasis now on the relationship between growth and infrastructure investment. Stronger links have been made about the positive role that this plan can make in terms of the national growth agenda, and also to the LEP's ambitions and the emerging local industrial strategy. We've made it clearer that quality and sustainability are central to the vision and central to the Garden Cities agenda, which is suggested in the document as being something which should be followed in the future. It's been clarified that this plan is simply providing a framework for more detailed plans to come forward at the local district level in the local planning process. In terms of the A46 corridor, the emphasis is perhaps even greater on that corridor being a priority for investment and growth, with the Southern Gateway now removed from the plan in favour of an A5 improvement corridor, where the emphasis now is on infrastructure investment to support growth which is already planned and in the pipeline, rather than proposing any additional growth over and above that. The Northern Gateway has been redefined as the Leicestershire International Gateway to recognise the importance of the economic activity in that particular part of the county. Lutterworth has been moved to managed growth via the local plan rather than it being a key centre. Melton Mowbray is now named as the sole key centre for regeneration and growth, so more emphasis on the role of Melton Mowbray. There is more explicit support for public transport enhancements across the area, and more on the importance of aligning homes and jobs so that people don't need to travel so far to get to work. Finally, there is more explicit support for regeneration proposals, particularly in places such as Colville. So, as a result, Chairman, the draft plan, which is now before all the councils for consideration, contains the following elements. In terms of basic principles, no particular change from the plan which you've seen before. An explanation that the start point is that this is dealing with larger than local issues in many respects, and therefore that the national and regional perspective is important. There's an emphasis on this plan being for the longer term. It's through to 2050, whereas planning horizons, as you know, are normally only 15 or 20 years at most. And there's an acknowledgement that there are lots of options, but we are looking to balance strategic and non-strategic developments in the longer term. The key matters, the challenges which are faced by the plan have not been updated. These have stayed consistent through the process. They revolve around housing, the economy, the provision of infrastructure, and protecting the environment and built heritage. Similarly, to meet that challenge, the priorities which have been identified are still the same. So we're looking here to balance housing and jobs provision with protecting the environment. We're looking to be more strategic about the way in which we achieve growth and therefore bring about a step change away from smaller sites and accretions on the edge of towns and villages to more strategic new settlements. We are taking advantage of the higher level plans that are in place, particularly the Midlands Engine and Midlands Connect strategies, by saying we need to secure that essential infrastructure, and we can plan some of our future growth in a way which is going to enhance the case that can be made for that infrastructure provision. And finally, there are messages about we are looking for sustainable, attractive and well-connected communities which are well designed and of high quality. The settlement plan is well known already, and I don't think I need to say anything further about that. There is clearly a corridor of recent growth based on the M69 M1 corridors, and there are largely rural areas still to the west and east of that. And the approach within the plan about the garden city type approach and the way in which we want to have strong, independent market towns supporting the central city, but supplemented by new settlements in the future which will play their own role in that particular hierarchy. The plan still contains plenty to explain that we didn't start with a blank sheet of paper. So there are national policies, particularly around productivity and growth, and the local industrial strategy more locally. And there are national imperatives, as you all well know, about building more homes at a faster rate and linking that more effectively to infrastructure provision. The key drivers from a regional level in terms of economic growth are those which are set out in the Midlands Engine strategy. I think it interests me on that particular side the extent to which there is a real conglomeration of key sites generally to the north and centre of the city at the moment, and less going on to the south. So that's interesting in terms of maybe the balance which is coming through the plan now with a shift in emphasis of growth in the longer term. Likewise, key drivers from the region in terms of infrastructure investment in both rail and in road are as set out in that plan, and again I know you're familiar with that, so I'll push on. And then this slide, which is not an easy slide obviously to either see on a screen or to see effectively on a map in a booklet. It's something which only really comes to life when you use it interactively on a computer, but it does record very clearly the key important environmental considerations which exist, and the historic landscape and historic buildings considerations which there are, which have an impact on the choices which we make for development going forward. So this plan records, for example, all the areas which might be prone to flooding, forests and woodland, green wedges, conservation areas, nature reserves, triple SIs, all those sorts of things are on this background information plan. And that all leads us to some key proposals which are sort of just summarised on that particular diagram. A central city which is going to remain really important and where we expect there to be significant development across the whole of the period through to 2050. The A46 now identified as a priority corridor for growth, which is expected to take in the region of 40,000 homes in total by 2050. The A5 being identified now as an improvement corridor, less emphasis on further growth, but an acknowledgement that there is a lot of growth already planned in that area. The international gateway to the north, Melton Mowbray being identified as the key centre in the east, managed growth in the market towns, which are with the dotted circles, and then outside of those areas, local needs only being addressed in the more rural locations. Now, as members appreciate, this is a strategy, I think, that we are seeking to ensure holds good, notwithstanding the time period over which the growth might come about. So I know there's been lots of discussions about, are the predictions in the plan about the number of homes that we might need by 2050 right? Is new information suggesting that it might be lower? And what I would say to you on that is this is a strategy which is really set out on the basis that irrespective about whether that number of homes are needed by 2050 or by 2060 or later, or looking through the other end of the telescope, whether they're needed even more quickly, the strategy remains valid. The strategy is an approach which can be tempered as more information becomes available and as more detail is known through the local planning process, so that sites are brought forward as and when required to meet the identified needs when more detailed work has been done. So it's a strategy where we've identified some big proposals and where you can turn the tap on and off at a faster or a slower rate, dependent on the new information which comes available to you in future years. It's impossible to look to 2050 and say with any degree of certainty that's the number of houses you're going to need by that stage. We simply haven't got the information to do that at the moment, and we don't pretend in this plan that that's the case. We try to give clear the impression that this is setting out a strategy, not setting out specific numbers. Having said that, there are certainly proposals which are already in the pipeline through to 2031 in particular in local plans, and we acknowledge that those plans, they're already known and they're already planning for in the region of 96,000 houses through to 2031. It's the 2031 to 50 figure which is more difficult to identify, and also where it's almost impossible to identify what the employment land needs might be, because they're much more difficult to project forward. There is a less obvious linear progression in terms of employment land needs, because it follows the economic cycle. So those are the housing and employment needs to 2011 to 50, which are set out in the plan. There is a difference now between the plan which you considered previously and this plan which is now in front of you, in terms of a slight shift in what is being proposed beyond 2031. So, as I've already explained, the A46, the draft proposals which you considered earlier in the year in February were based on the A46 and the Southern Gateway taking around 40,000 dwellings, the Northern Gateway 10, Melton Mowbray and Lutterworth 5, and there being 35,000 homes on non-strategic sites. The slight shift in emphasis and changes because of the feedback from the consultation now means that the A46 area alone, now it's the priority growth corridor, is still taking 38,000 houses. That's 2,000 down on originally, but 2,000 down within a smaller general strategic area. The Leicestershire International Gateway has increased from 10,000 to 11,200, so an additional 1,200 added there. And the only key centre now is Melton Mowbray, which was originally expected to take around 3,000, and that's increased to 3,800. So the overall impact is that there's been a reduction of 2,000 in terms of the expectations about delivery on those strategic sites. Plus, again, we still think around 35,000 on the non-strategic sites. But I stress again, those are based on figures which are simply extrapolated forward. Those figures are likely to change, and you'll be able to measure the local plan processes as you go forward in a much finer way than you can this plan. This slide is merely there to confirm those changes, and perhaps I just point to one particular part of the slide in the top right there under the box saying total delivery. It summarises in terms of the district and borough council boundaries what the impact of the changes between the draft plan and this final one is. So it's taken 2,000 dwellings out of Harborough district, it's added 800 into Melton Borough, and it's added 1,200 into North West Leicestershire. That's the only key change. You'll be pleased to hear, Chairman, that's the end of the presentation, but obviously we're happy to take questions.
Okay, thanks for that. Quite a bit of detail there. Just on the consultation then, you indicated how many responses and you said what the key areas of concern or support were. Can you put some numbers around that then, in terms of what the public was saying? Because I think that's particularly relevant. What was the response in terms of percentages or numbers in being for, against, support, issues raised? I think in the member briefing before there were some more detailed figures on those. Is there a proper consultation report being written? Yeah. Is that available?
If you, Chair, if you go to the strategic plan website, the full report from the consultation is available there to read, and that has the actual percentages of people that either agreed or disagreed with a statement, along with a summary of the extra comments that people made to support those opinions.
Can you put some numbers on that for us this morning?
Unless we can log on to it now, I don't have all of those in my head, I'm afraid.
Okay. So I think there's a number of key areas that we want to focus on. Obviously, the housing numbers, notwithstanding what's been said about how long you look over this, there's a lot of stuff going on at the moment about new household projection figures. CPRE have addressed that in their submission. And then the latter one saying there's going to be a consultation on from the government, or there is a consultation. So perhaps you tell us a bit more about that. And also, I'd like to focus on this issue of the Leicester unmet need. Now, I like many members, sat in a number of public inquiries, one quite recently where in Harborough, where the inspector's saying this cannot be quantified at the moment. He parked it. Now, I appreciate that's in respect to the current situation, but the people from the City Council were not in a position to give any realistic indication of what unmet need they're likely to have to declare. And it could be another 18 months, 2 years before they're in a position to that. So you've said that, you know, this is a best estimate, but it seems to me there's a considerable uncertainty about how much redistribution will have to be required by the districts in order to accommodate this unmet need. And then I'll refer you back to the ONS housing figures, which actually show it's going down in Leicester. And that's got to have an implication for the way this plan develops in future years. And it seems to me that's not really addressed. There's not a mechanism by which that will be tackled at a later stage. So someone like to respond to that?
Perhaps, Chairman, if I kick off by saying a few words about the projections and the basis of the numbers in the strategic growth plan, and then I'm sure Dave and Caroline may well want to come in and add to what I say on that, and then I think Dave will cover the unmet need in Leicester situation. I think it's sort of going back to the starting point, really, that the growth plan has been prepared within the context of government policy and government guidance, and the independent evidence available, including that provided in the form of projections by ONS. The HEDNA, which obviously part of that is around the housing needs assessment, was prepared on the basis of the latest evidence available at that time, which was the 2014 based household projections. But of course those projections were just a starting point for estimating the housing need. They're not in themselves the housing need figures. So they're policy off projections of past trends in effect. And we, through the work on the HEDNA, and if you've seen the HEDNA, a lot of work was done to take into account other factors in addition to those projections. They are important, the projections. They're perhaps the major foundation of the housing needs figures, but other issues need to be taken into account. And I think it's fair to say that the HEDNA is recognised as a robust and comprehensive piece of work. The new 2016 based projections which came out are again themselves, policy off. They haven't taken account of policy. They haven't taken account of other factors. So they are a projection forward of past trends. They imply at a national level housing provision of around 212,000 dwellings per annum. And we know, of course, that the government's policy is for 300,000 dwellings to be provided per annum. So one can expect that when those are considered and taken forward in the future, that those numbers will increase when policy considerations are taken into account, and that will clearly have an impact on Leicester and Leicestershire. But I think the other important thing to take into account is what was released on Friday, when the government issued a consultation paper on the calculation of future housing needs. It's a fairly technical document, I think it's fair to say, but the government is consulting on how housing needs are calculated for local planning and other purposes. And if you just bear with me while I move to the relevant paragraph. Effectively, what the government has stressed is that local planning authorities and others involved in producing planning documents should not base those calculations at the current time on the more recent projections. And there's three things that they've effectively stated. Firstly, that for the short term, and they don't specify what the short term is, but they specify that the 2014 base data will provide the demographic baseline for assessment of local housing need. Secondly, to make clear in national planning practice guidance that lower numbers through the 2016 base projections do not qualify as an exceptional circumstance that justifies a departure from the standard methodology. And thirdly, in the longer term, to review the formula with a view to establishing a new method for calculating housing needs by the time the next projections are issued. So I think what's implied by that is well, certainly what's made clear by that is that local planning authorities and others producing documents like this should base their work on the 2014 projections, and it seems to imply also that sort of holds until the formula is reviewed and the next projections come out, and then there will be a fresh round of calculating what the numbers are. So I think that is a consultation document, so that will be subject to comments, and I'm sure many people will be making comments on that. But the clear steer from government is in the meantime is that we stick with the 2014 numbers and plan on that basis, and that will be the advice to all local planning authorities and local plan inspectors. And given that this document is primarily around supporting local planning authorities to come to a view on what's an appropriate distribution of housing across a wider area, it makes sense for this plan to work to those projections, and obviously with the head now having been based on those projections, we think that's provides a firm basis for the numbers in the plan.
Okay, I'll open it up to members if you want to ask questions about housing numbers. Are you in a position just to comment on the breakdown on the consultation? Have you got any more info on that? Thank you.
So just to put some percentages around the various questions. So the question that was asking to what extent people agreed or disagreed with the 4 key priorities that were outlined, there was sort of a fairly mixed response. 42% of respondents agreed with the 4 priorities and 42% disagreed. So it was very, very evenly split on that. In terms of the primary growth areas, the view on the A46 expressway, the majority of respondents actually disagreed with the proposed A46 expressway. That percentage was 57%, whereas a third said that they agreed with it, a percentage of 31% roughly. In terms of the view as Leicester as the central city, 54% agreed with that and 29% disagreed, with 17% neither agreeing or disagreeing with that statement. So pretty much more in favour of that than perhaps some of the other questions that were being asked. In terms of the northern and southern gateways, the respondents were in greater agreement with the proposed northern gateway, as was outlined by Dave in his presentation. So nearly half the respondents agreed with the northern gateway, around about 47%, whereas less than a third disagreed. In contrast, when we came to the Southern Gateway, only a third of respondents actually agreed with the proposed Southern Gateway, and about half expressed disagreement with that. And I think also just worth noting that 4 in 10 respondents strongly disagreed with the Southern Gateway that was being proposed, and again that has been obviously taken into account as you've heard. So that was in terms of the sort of secondary growth areas. In terms of the key centres, again, I think the response was fairly evenly split between the 2 proposed key centres. So about 4 in 10 respondents agreed with the development of Lutterworth, and 38% with Melton as key centres, and about a third of respondents disagreed with both of those 2. Does that give you sufficient?
I think that's really helpful that
flavour?
members have
Okay.
a feeling of what the public was saying in response to that consultation. So what you're saying is then that the changes to the plan that have been put forward, particularly shifting those 2,000 houses and the dropping of the Lutterworth, that is a response to what people were saying. Is that what's driven those? I mean, I'm after understanding, you know, basically you've taken 2,000 houses and reallocated them to other areas. Is the justification for that the consultation, or is there another reason why you've done that?
It reflects the consultation responses, and they were certainly a significant part of the driver behind those changes. But also clearly as work's progressed and other things have become known, work in particular on HS2 has sought to even further emphasise the importance of what was the Northern Gateway, now the International Gateway. So that was an added reason for an acknowledgement that Towton HS2, the spreading of the impact of that into Northern Leicestershire was something which should be acknowledged, and was another driver. Melton Mowbray, the local council there, was very strongly putting forward the view that it was keen to promote regeneration and happy to be considering higher numbers in the longer term if it would help it achieve its ambition to complete the distribution road around the town. So that was another thing which had a bearing on what we did in relation to Melton Mowbray, and certainly the extent of feedback from the localities around Lutterworth and the Southern Gateway was instrumental in us dropping those 2 proposals from the plan altogether. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for that. I'd like to talk about transport, but maybe members want to ask some questions on housing numbers and distribution, how we've got to that. I've got Alan Pearson at the moment, then I've got Michael, and then Terry. Did I see a hand up over there?
Yeah.
No? Okay, we've got that to start with. Yes, please.
Just the consultation, I'm really concerned that we're basing a lot of evidence on 500 odd people responding out of 700,000 now, I think, projection. So I find that very difficult to accept. I've said this before, we need to really look how we consult. From a district point of view, I'd like to know how the districts were involved, because we did a recent consultation, we got 2,500 people responding, so we didn't look how we're doing it. Because if this was a marketing company, we would not do anything. We would stand still because the information we're getting isn't good enough. So I'm really concerned about the process of consultation. That's number one. I haven't finished yet.
Very good point. Yeah.
So I really do that. I find it hard to accept as a councillor, to be honest, to actually make any decision and believe and really put any weight on 500 odd people. Okay?
Chairman, Trevor, I can answer that if you'd like me to do it now.
Let's take members' comments on how. Well, we're on the consultation at the moment, so we cover consultation and housing numbers, and then as the chairman who chaired this process, if you want to come back at the end and fill in, that would be fine. Is that okay? So
I would accept each individual stakeholder is responsible for its own consultation. Full stop.
Michael Wyatt.
I'm finished. Oh, I'm sorry. So, yeah, that's
You've
okay.
got more.
That's all right. So that's okay. Secondly, we're looking at the population growth, housing growth, that has been contentious in, I believe, in all areas. I still can't add the figures up. I'm not necessarily the brightest person in the world, but I prefer physical activity to maths when I was at school, but there you go. But I'm still trying to work out the percentage of population growth compared to the houses we expected to build, don't add up. I can't tally them. So I guess that's my bugbear. But when I'm looking at figures on the computer, of national figures, of the population growth over the number of years in Leicestershire and the housing that were expected, I just feel they don't correlate. That's the second thing. Thirdly, in the initial brief at the beginning, what we haven't got is some very important information is in regard to people skills. Now, I know for a fact from Melton Mowbray, Bottisford, we've got people who are very highly skilled, and I'm sure Market Harborough, quite expensive houses, etc. Same in around the outskirts of certain parts of Leicestershire. People commute to Grantham, they commute to Nottingham, they commute to Northampton, they commute to Peterborough to work and come back. And that commuting means that we've got a brain drain because they're taking their skills out of the county to use them and coming back, potentially because we don't, I understand, provide necessarily the type of work they want. But I'd like to see those type of figures because that dictates generally what sort of industry and science we want to encourage to come to Leicestershire. Okay, so I just really passionate about how we develop. The other issue that is a real concern, we talked about independent market towns, etc. And of course, the unitary situation that we're talking about hasn't been brought into this. That may have an impact on independence and how districts and market towns work. But the figures of footfall in market towns are down. Now, you go to the market towns and ask the bids, they go, wow. And we know why. There's a lot of technology. People aren't travelling. They're buying online. There is a real problem with our market towns and our shops. And this isn't highlighted. Now, if they go, then we're going to have another people moving out, less people. So it really is, we need to paint a real truthful picture in any survey we do. And I just feel somewhere along there, I don't feel comfortable that we've done, no disrespect to anybody here, I'm just saying a clearer picture of what really is happening in the grassroots, because it is changing, it is very fluid. So I'd have liked a bit more information, because that impacts population, impacts growth, what's really going on the grassroots. We tendency to be focusing on the big storage centres, the big roads, etc. Yet actually, people tell you the actual soul of community are the small employers, the people with the small shops. They employ the most people, believe it or not. So these are the sort of things we need to get hold of, and these are the sort of people we need to represent and help. And that's my view, what I feel just on the survey. Is that okay?
Right, I'm going to take a range of comments and then the officers can respond how they wish to at the end. So it's Michael Wyatt next.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. You'll have to bear with me because it's the first time I've really been able to scrutinise this in this sort of way. But I want to point members to page 15, where the Scrutiny Commission was broadly supported the principle of having a strategic plan to prevent unplanned growth which has damaged the character of local areas and lack infrastructure. Just that first paragraph is really interesting because in reality, in Colville, what we've got is thousands of houses being built, loss of character of local areas and a lack of major infrastructure. That is the reality on the ground. So, all these nice words in these documents are very, all good, and writing a report saying, all these nice good words saying you're going to do this, you're going to do that. But in reality, none of it's true. On the ground, none of it's true. All it is chaos, congestion. It's just a mess. And with you wanting now to put an additional 1,200 houses in North West Leicestershire, again, that's going to create more congestion, more chaos. On the ground, it is a mess, and that's the only thing I can say, really. I don't know what world you're living in. This report really means it's meaningless to the people. I know you're just doing your job, but in reality, I don't know where you are. You're not on this planet.
Michael, that figure you gave, I think it's important. You said 1,200 in Northwest. What were you basing that on? Because the figure in the notional table for Northwest is 9,700. Oh, I'm sorry. It's the extra as a result of the consultation on top of. Yeah, okay, thanks for clarifying that. Right, Terry Inham.
Thank you, Chair. I wish to support the Chair's comments about the problem with how this gets updated. When we've discussed our local plan at the other place where I have a hat on, at North West Leicestershire, one of the officers was very happy to point out that, yes, every time you get new data, but this is going to be out of date. And I don't think it's possible to create a plan that isn't going to be almost immediately out of date, given the lead time of consultation. So I do think we need to have a clear idea of how there has to be some kind of rolling programme of not just tempering, but actually reviewing this in the line with what happens. You know, if we had a sudden massive, loss of population, if we ever get the Spanish flu that the public health keep promising us, things would be very, very different for us. So I think that's important. I think I do have to agree with Councillor Wyatt's point. In North West Leicestershire, in Hugglescote alone, there's about 4,500 houses going in, which are lovely, right next to the Amazon factory, and they would be lovely if they weren't 3 or 4 bedroom detached homes that none of the people working on the minimum wage in Amazon will ever be able to afford. I do like to see the mild support for the Leicester to Burton line, which actually goes right through the middle of that estate. It would be nice to have that reinstated, but I have to share Councillor Wyatt's scepticism. I think it is just put in there to keep me quiet, I think. And then the actual final question really is, I think, Ian Vez, you said something about Homes England wish to support us, and that on page 176 in this report. We know we've got a problem with affordable homes. The estate I've just mentioned is only going to have 7.5% affordable homes because so much of the Section 106 money is going into a pot to try and improve road infrastructure. What I need, if we're going to get people behind something like this, we have to know that this genuinely is going to stop having the more of the same that Councillor White has quite properly complained about. That we are building massive estates on green fields with no public transport. You can't get to work from Colville after 6 o'clock in the evening or on Sundays. And what are we going to do about affordable homes, and what are we going to do about public transport that is different? How can you convince me to back a plan like this?
I'm going to come on to transport because I think that needs looking at as a standalone issue that we might want to make some comments on to the cabinet. Is that okay? But I've picked up your point. Right.
Do Kevin first.
No, we've got Maggie next.
Terry just touched on it, but mine's really about the statistics again, the housing statistics, and I know the officers, you have touched on it, but I would like to know how, if any overestimating will be addressed, how will it be addressed, what is the mechanism, what will the impact then be on the infrastructure bids going in. The other point is, I represent the area in Stony Stanton, Sapco, where this has a dramatic effect, will have a dramatic effect on my area because we've got the strategic rail hub as well. But one of my points is around housing is the impact of the air quality. I realise this is a strategy, I realise it is a vision, but if we're building houses and we're building infrastructure, in the recent announcements that we're a very, very high pollution area and we're putting a massive amount into one area, I just want to know how that fits in with the vision, please.
Kevin?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. When David started, I'm sure he mentioned something about the fact that this was, this plan was a fairly unique situation across the country because people all got together, the LEP and everything else all come together to look at this over the next 22, 30 years. And I picked up a bit of information the other day, which I was really quite surprised I hadn't heard more about it, that there is just south of us an even bigger plan. They've called it the Oxford-Cambridge Arc. And this is, as you can imagine, Oxford to Cambridge is quite a long way. It involves Northampton in it. There'll be an expressway and 1 million homes. Are we thinking big enough?
Is that a serious comment?
The serious bit is, are we taking account of the fact there's 1 million homes like to be built just south of our borders in this plan?
You mean the impact on
The impact,
Leicestershire?
absolutely.
Okay.
I mean, I made a big comment
I
at
thought what you were saying is you wanted to increase the numbers.
This is hypothetical. I mean, if south of us they're looking at 1 million, I just found it a staggering number, to be fair. And I've made the point at member briefing before. Kettering is being ignored in this plan, and I'm staggered. Why we've got Corby and Peterborough and Northampton and ignoring Kettering, I find staggering. The A14 is a major route, and I know we're going to come on to transport a bit later, but just as a pure example, when the M1 had a bit of trouble yesterday morning, earlier this week, with a couple of lanes closed, in fact shut at one stage, where do they all go? Up the A6.
And Rosita.
Thank you, Chairman. I think most of my comments have been addressed. I concur with Maggie. We haven't spent enough emphasis in this plan on air quality. And i.e. being the Lutterworth member, we've talked originally about a relief road, which was downgraded to a spine road, and now it seems to have been dropped out of the plan. Now, my issue is, and we'll come on to it later, the emphasis on the long-term infrastructure is not actually addressed enough. And that brings me to Kevin's point. We need to look in a strategic plan also of the impact that surrounding developments will bring to us. Kettering, Rugby. Now, Rugby comes into Lutterworth. The roads are congested all around Lutterworth. If we were talking additional development in Blaby, it will all go onto the A46 to go onto the motorway. It needs some sort of road network that alleviates the congestion. And I think if we are talking long-term, even strategic needs, we need to look at strategic infrastructure and strategic road network. And I think that this plan looks at houses. Now, Alan made some valid points, but I believe that will be addressed in the infrastructure strategy. But I do concur with them. We need to look at more knowledge-based industry rather than warehousing, etc. And there comes my next question. This plan, and on the last slide, we were looking at B8, but it says small-scale B8. While everywhere there is an emphasis on unnecessary B8 all along Maggie's on the Hinkley A5 corridor and whatever. So I would like to know, when will we know what is required in B8 sections? Now, this plan also puts an emphasis on that to deliver the infrastructure through local plans and through planning applications. But I think it is virtually impossible, because we need to look at it across the whole area, the MAC area, because as an individual and the small type of development, we can't secure the infrastructure we need long term. So we need to work together at that. And I've got two more points. Now, you mentioned, Tom was talking about the projection and the housing need is based on the 2014 projection. But then we've also saying that we haven't got a robustness of this projection. So should we then not put a caveat to this plan in our local delivery plan that this is all potential, that it is subject to change, and that, as Maggie said, that we are monitoring it and putting a monitoring plan alongside all of this. And my last point to finish on, plenty to go, we are looking at building houses, but nowhere are we actually saying that we need to build communities, because houses on their own are useless if we don't have all of the needs that builds an effective community. And I think that should be the caveat, the quality and building a community. And I feel that needs to be also addressed before we're saying, let's plaster the whole Leicestershire with additional housing. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that. I've got Jonathan Morgan.
Thank you very much. Really just a very brief question. I just wondered whether through the consultation process anyone had raised the question of how us as an authority deal with our own pecuniary interests in the promotion of the land that we own as part of the promotion of the strategic growth plan itself.
Right, do you mean as an authority or an individual?
No, as an authority, because we as an authority, we obviously have a lot of farmland which we are currently promoting for development.
Okay, I understand that, thank you. Focusing on housing and the issues that have been raised, I say we'll talk about transport in a minute. Tom, are you going to respond to some of the issues? One thing I think that's come out very, very clearly this morning is the need for a review period, given the uncertainty of things you've talked about. Now, for a local plan, the government requires that it's a minimum. You have to do it in 5 years, don't you? Now, I appreciate this isn't a statutory plan, but what would be your response if we asked for a commitment from the partners that this would be reviewed as a local plan would within 5 years?
Yes, if I take that first point, clearly the intention always has been that this plan will be kept under review. It is a voluntary, non-statutory plan. It's more of a framework than a plan in some ways. It sets a framework for local plans, and it absolutely isn't a local plan for the whole area. And I think there's been a very deliberate attempt, and I think all of the local authorities involved have wanted to make sure that this plan didn't duplicate what's in the local plans. No decisions have been taken about the timing of a review, but it will be absolutely critical that the plan is kept up to date as new evidence comes forward. I think there are various things that you need to have to effectively review the plan. So an updated set of projections which are supported by the government and which are going to be set in the context for local plans.
So what you're saying is that it might be that there would be some triggers.
Absolutely.
That if certain things happened that we don't know about, or in the future, that would kick off the need for a review.
That's right, and the decision isn't. So I didn't tell my thing. The decision is in the hands of the partner authorities. It's in the hands of the county council, the city council, and the 7 districts working together when a review is carried out. And clearly, all particularly the local planning authorities, but also the county council, we need to demonstrate to government that we're effectively cooperating, fulfilling that duty to cooperate, so that we can plan properly for the area. If that isn't done, the local plans are in a much more difficult position. So it's in our interest to make sure that cooperation is effective, and it's only effective if we're using the most recent and best evidence that's available. So as soon as we get to a trigger of the evidence that's available prompts a change, then that would be the time to carry out a review. And I think certainly the availability of new projections and an agreed methodology, the government says it's going to review it, that is very likely to be a trigger. But other things may happen which mean that we want to carry out an early review. And that clearly is something that the members' advisory group will be able to consider and make recommendations back into the individual councils.
Want to carry on and answer some of these points that have been raised, please?
So So I'm sure I won't be able to cover everything. So colleagues will jump in. I mean, I mentioned before that this isn't a local plan. So I think with respect, I think some of the comments that have been made are issues that will be picked up at local plan level. So issues like the strength of individual local market towns, and what needs to be done in those market towns to support them. I think that's better dealt with at local plan level and not in detail in this strategic plan. So similarly, the local air quality issues that arise from development. What this plan helps the partner authorities do is to decide the broad distribution of development across the wider area, recognising that the local authority boundaries don't follow any natural economic functional boundaries, for example. They're fairly artificially drawn in many ways. People travel to work across those boundaries, so we need to work to that wider geography. And clearly there are some parts of the county that are better able to take housing growth than other parts of the area where there are constraints, because they're largely built up areas, or there may be environmental constraints. So we need to look at what the broad distribution of the area, a broad distribution of development across the area should be, and that's what this plan has done. The strategy has been to have as sustainable a distribution as possible. So we have wanted to focus on strategic developments where possible, with sustainable communities in development that can be supported by infrastructure, because the scale of the development in those places can help us secure the infrastructure investment that will enable them to become sustainable. One of the alternatives, I mean, there are alternatives around building new settlements, and that's something that we looked at. But the other alternative would be to continue with the existing strategy, which would be to add houses to small settlements, to our towns and onto the edge of our bigger towns and the city, in a way which we decided fairly early on in the process wasn't really feasible and wouldn't be sustainable. And that the impact of that would be that we would have to deal with all of these large houses without being able to secure the infrastructure to support them, because the development would have been so much scattered. And that, I think, would lead to more congestion in the future, more air pollution in the future. That's not to say that those won't be issues in relation to this, but we think that this approach maximises the opportunity to minimise, if you like, those issues. It gives us the best chance of having a sustainable solution moving forward. I'm trying to think back to what some of the other questions were. I think those probably pick up most of the strategic ones around housing issues. I don't know if colleagues want to jump in on any others.
I'll try and pick up one or two things, but I did want to say just perhaps one more thing about the review issue, because you've highlighted the importance of that. This process started off when it was very clearly the case that the government was supporting the voluntary coming together of councils to produce a non-statutory plan. It's very evident from the more recent changes to the National Planning Policy Framework that the government's emphasis now is on statutory plans at the strategic level going forward. So yes, there will need to be some consideration by all of the authorities about how and when to review this, but in all probability that will force the authorities to consider the need for a statutory plan rather than a non-statutory one, and that's something which will have to be debated and thought through. And if that is the road which the councils go down, then the beast that you end up with is going to be a very different beast indeed, because you will need all sorts of different evidence to back up a statutory plan, which we have not had to collect in relation to producing this plan. The time period, there's no way a statutory plan could be produced through to 2050, so it would have to have a shorter time period so that the evidence is available to back up what you're suggesting in it. As I say, it would be a very different thing. So I think there will clearly be a need for a review, But when you consider that review, it is probable, I think, that you will conclude that what you need to do going forward is a different form of process rather than to repeat and simply roll forward this one. Councillor Wyatt very eloquently described what a mess we're in at the moment in many parts of the area, and I agree with him. And that is why there is a strong emphasis in this plan, in the longer term, that we want to move away from most of the housing coming forward in an ad hoc way, added on bit by bit to existing settlements, where we've got the vast majority of our housing is coming forward like that at the moment, and not very much is on strategic sites. The emphasis here is to shift that completely in the period beyond 2031, so that you're planning for larger settlements for the majority of your housing provision, and that gives you much greater control in terms of ensuring that the stream of infrastructure which you need to support that development comes on at the right time. Most of the problems we've got at the moment, and there are problems all over the place, relate to the lack of infrastructure provision to support the housing which is being built, and I agree with that. And this plan is trying to address that. We've got a lot of commitments in the shorter term which we're going to have to try our best to deal with, and that's why Homes England is really important, because it can give funding to help developers get over short-term funding problems and enable them to deliver whilst also bringing forward the infrastructure delivery to match. So that's what we're working on with Homes England. I'd like to thank Councillor Mrs Page for making a very strong case for the A46 Expressway. What you said suggested to me very clearly that you need that key piece of infrastructure to support additional housing provision in that part of the county.
I didn't say that.
So you strongly made that case in my mind. And yes, Dr. Feltham, the looking more widely, have we thought about what's going on Oxford, Cambridge, Milton Keynes? Yes, we have. Have we thought about what's going on Birmingham, Coventry, etc.? Yes, we have. We've taken that into account. This is, I keep saying it, a very high-level plan. And it's specifically aimed to have taken into account the key things which are going on strategically around us. I take your point, though, about Kettering.
Okay, we'll move on to transport, but I'm just... Anthony, can you help us on this issue that Jonathan has raised in relation to local authority-owned land that they may wish to promote through the growth plan? Now, of course, County Council's in the same position here, because it is also looking to promote land. You want to take this? I think
I'll just say a little bit, just to remind members that Councillor Morgan makes an important point that we all need to be aware of. But in terms of going forward, in terms of this type of sort of planning, everything has to be in the pot, and things can't be excluded. And the safeguards will be at a time when matters need to come forward for application for planning permission, for example, and that's the time when the safeguards will have to be applied to ensure probity and transparency of decision making, and the split between any planning function and function in terms of making money on assets, for example. So I think it's right to flag it, but it's not something that should concern members in terms of looking at this document and taking decisions about it in terms of how you wish to take it forward. And I hope that helps.
Just to say, I'd actually asked whether anyone had raised it.
I can answer that, Chairman. No, they didn't.
Ian, did you want to add something?
Merely wish to add, if Anne had been here, Anne, my director, actually leads on the corporate outcome around housing, and one of the many discussions we're having with Homes England about us bidding for money for the infrastructure I know members are so keen about is the role of the county council as a landowner, even developer, and how we can actually raise the level of developments that are happening in the county. We can drive forward, and I think we've seen the best example of that so far is in Melton Mowbray, where because of the turning of money that we make from developments, we're able to forward fund the infrastructure gaps, such as for Melton to deliver those. So it's quite interesting once you get past, we're not making profits for some chairman to have a very large bonus. All the money comes back to the people of Leicestershire and helps deliver better outcomes for Leicestershire, and that's what Anne leads on. So it's a really good point we have.
You wouldn't be thinking of a certain development that's been in the news lately. Okay, right. Let's move on to transport.
Can I come back, because a couple of points which weren't answered. First of all, no, I did not make a case for the Western for the relief road around Leicester, because what I've asked, it is really, there will be an impact, and the impact which is from development across sections, from Kettering, from Rugby, and I think Ian could probably answer that, because I think it's very, very important to residents to know that. And also that linked to Maggie's point of air quality, I think that also needs to be answered. Because how do we work across borders? I think that is one of the main points residents also want to know if we're going ahead with that. So if you can feature that within your next presentation. Thank you.
Right. Transport, obviously absolutely critical to this, and we've had various discussions with the director and yourself previously. So I think there's kind of 3 points to kick it off. First is, where, given the critical nature of locating 38,000 houses, which requires this expressway, where are we with the expressway process? Okay, so that's the first point in terms of the options. Second point was, late during the consultation, the transport assessment. Well, I mean, it is disappointing. I have to say that wasn't available at the start of the process. But nevertheless, you extended the timescale for the consultation to look at that. But anyone who's read that, or if you haven't, you ought to. Because what that says is, if you don't do something about the radial routes in and out of Leicester as well, you can build the expressway, but if you don't address radial routes, you will still have major congestion problems, because you need to move traffic in and out of the city as well as around it. So that's the second point. What are we doing to address the conclusions of the transport assessment? And then the third point is around the northern, going to be the International Gateway, the development going on there, HS2, the link into the airport, a lot of infrastructure going on in there. Can you update us on that? And there was a discussion at the Cabinet last week about putting aside funding to have officers that will work in relation to the impacts of HS2 and so on. But given the International Gateway there, what are the transport issues there that are going to come up over the next few years? So I think those are the 3 critical ones, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'll start taking those through. Actually, first piece on the A46 Expressway. As you know, we deal with infrastructure at a number of levels, and where we can try and deal with them within Leicestershire when they go up to a certain value. When we start talking of things like the A46 Expressway or large new infrastructure on rail, it's beyond Leicestershire, and we have to work in partnership, which we then do through Midlands Connect and through Transport for East Midlands. The Midlands Connect A46 study is actually, I've been told this morning, will be published on the 7th of November is the current date. So we will arrange for that to appear on the Members Hub with the links there for the conclusion of that first stage of study work that Midlands Connect have done, which will then paint the picture of the next steps of work. Obviously, we're talking a major piece of infrastructure here, which will have a very long gestation period to take through, much like this plan. It will be about steps, so we'll see there, and we will continue support through Midlands Connect with all the other authorities on what happens. That really picks up on Rosita's point as well. The next steps of that work, because obviously you start very large, you then work down to what are the individual parts, the components and the impacts, air quality and various other bits. Those will be the next iterations of work that will need to be done. We are working with Midlands Connect to make sure that, because the A46 can play a part in solving Birmingham's problems on transport or resilience on the M1 or the A14, how you study that will have to be very robust, and that's the level that Midlands Connect are doing, but we are supporting a lot. So that's on the A46. Regarding the evidence, obviously you've had very high level evidence from the transport, and if you read it, yes, it's what always the modelling does in transport evidence. It says, if you do this, i.e. the very high level planning on the numbers, this will be the impact on a very broad level. the iterations then we will have to go through with ourselves and the City Council, the other highway authority, is then taking those iterations down into the local plan levels as this plan feeds through to work through what exactly do you then need to do to overcome those issues it's highlighted. So the radial routes into your public transport, into your connectivity. The evidence at the moment and the plan is on such a high level, you're talking such very broad numbers. You're not saying in this town or on this street you're going to have this level of growth. It's that high. But those are the iterations that we've now got to plan for this plan to be brought through. They're the evidence, because only on that evidence can we try and compete, as we will do nationally, for funding to deliver out either infrastructure or better bus services or more cycling. I think there's quite an interesting, as a transport professional, in the last 100 years, transport's been pretty much the same. You know, we've replaced the horse with the car, and then it's just got more and more. What will the transport system look like by the end of this plan is a real interesting question, because you can go, well, actually, automation of vehicles will mean you get more efficiency, more safety, and all those things we're trying to do. So therefore, you don't need as many roads, you don't need to do improvements, you don't need to spend this money. And the flip side of that is, because automated vehicles will enable all those people who can't travel at the moment to travel more, therefore you will get more mobility, so therefore will you need more infrastructure? No one knows at the moment. That will emerge, and I think this plan, supported by the strategic transport plan which we will develop with the city, will have to look at how it will address not only the, as we've heard, the issues we know about up to 2031, such as the £40 million worth of infrastructure needed on the A511 in Colville to deliver all that growth. That's almost the now. But actually, what do we have to do past 2031 for all that high-level evidence has said, okay, if you want to put all this growth in, these are the problems you've got to overcome. So that's the iterative process my colleagues and I will carry on doing. But there will be some real unknowns coming into that picture over the next 10 years. So that's on the evidence side. International Gateway, I have a personal interest as I only live a couple of miles from up there, so I monitor that infrastructure going in quite mad. Interesting discussions going on, major growth in that area, major job creation, lots of money being spent by private industry and national government on upgrading of the M1. HS2, the plan for delivery from 2033, by 2033. First of all, mitigating the impact of HS2 on Leicestershire. First thing I think we got across at Cabinet, which is why reluctantly they had to agree we get the money. It's not about railways, it's not about a train, it's about a major thing being built in Leicestershire and the disruption it will cause to the lives and the well-beings of everyone in Leicestershire if we don't take appropriate action. So that's what the funding's for. We've learnt the lessons from our colleagues in Warwickshire and Buckinghamshire who have been through this process already. All the advice says, if you just sit back and expect things to happen well, they probably won't. If you vigorously get involved, which is what the extra resource for, you can really not only mitigate the impacts across education, health provision, transport, but you can also get some benefits for your area as well as the economic benefits we'll try and get out of the Toten. Interestingly on that one, I know meetings with our statutory undertakers, the water, the gas, the electric, with HS2 in London recently, they were less than pleased on how they might be able to run their utilities for the 10 years in that area. So we will be supporting lots of people in Leicestershire or across the region on how do we keep functioning well whilst you're building this large thing. So there's that as well. I think that covered most of your points, Chair, if that's okay.
Ian, could you just talk about the industrial strategy and how that links the points Alan made and my point on the B8, the large scale, because all of that needs to be featured into the road system as well. So if you can just talk a little bit about that.
Obviously, having the industrial strategy in Leicestershire being one of the early ones that's been brought forward, once again, what it does, transport is only an enabler. We always end up at the end of the why hasn't it not been sorted question. By having an industrial strategy that paints a picture, and it only does the industries that they're trying to bring forward, such as advanced logistics, by having that evidence, it strengthens our case again for how we can go to the government and say, road and rail, these are the type of infrastructures that are required in Leicestershire. This is what we need to do to keep the economy running that you're trying to get us to bring forward. So we use the industrial strategy, we've used the strategic growth plan already with the numbers that are in there and the picture it's painting, to paint that picture of these are the big things you're going to have to do, and even down to now, actually, I was looking at the budget announcements, there was a lot going on. The £150 million for local junction improvements that was mentioned, we will use every bit of evidence to try and get as much as that money to improve the current situations we have. But they all lock together well. It's all about the evidence, and I think we're in a very good position in Leicestershire with the work that's going on compared to some other authorities, hence the amount of money we've been able to bring in.
And will that be based more onto needs and skills? Because we know we have a skill shortage, as Alan mentioned, and so to attract alternative industries. And will we see a large BA needs study? Because we seem to be going on to what developers put forward rather than on needs, even in Northwest. So could you just talk on that while we're at it?
Just on the local industrial strategy and the point you make about skills and skill shortages, local industrial strategy will look at the economy from all the different angles in Leicester and Leicestershire. So that will be around the provision of infrastructure and supporting industry and businesses to grow on the ground, and also make sure that the physical infrastructure is provided to support that. But it will also be looking at the people issues around skills. And making sure that we have the right facilities in place to train people and support people into better jobs and to support the growth of businesses in the area. That will interact with the strategic growth plan. What we're fortunate with in this area is the LEP is leading on the LIS, but the LEP is also a partner to the strategic growth plan. So we've got close working with the LEP on both those documents, and we use the evidence that we produce and commission to support both documents, so that we're working from consistent evidence on both documents, and that's important, and that doesn't happen in all areas. I think Dave's going to pick up the question about the B8 study.
Yes, there was a conscious and collective decision to exclude strategic B8 from the strategic growth plan process. That's not to say it's not an important matter for the authorities of Leicestershire, it clearly is. But what's happened on that one is that a strategic approach has been taken by the four authorities who are most impacted on by the pressure for development. So that's North West Leicestershire, Hinckley and Bosworth, Blaby and Harborough. They commissioned jointly a piece of work in 2014, which was updated in 2016. Harborough are now leading the process of putting together proposals to get some more up-to-date evidence via a further study to be carried out either later this year or probably into next year as well. But so, yeah, it's a live issue. A further study is going to be commissioned, and strategically we do want to be in a position where we're driving the bus, not having it driven forward for us.
If I may come back, would it not be more prudent to have an independent study carried out with, rather than having an affected local authority being a lead body onto that?
Sorry, it will be a commission study, so it will be independent. Yes, it will be carried out by independent appointed consultants on behalf of that group of authorities.
Right, I've got Kevin Felton.
Yeah, transport. We've heard the figures from Caroline about the fact that the A46 Expressway doesn't seem to be the most popular one of the plans in this document. I represent settlements, obviously not on the whole length, but certainly that would be affected, roughly wherever it goes at the moment. And the question I keep getting asked, and I haven't been able to answer them, and I've sort of raised it with Councillor Pendleton once in the past, is why is not more effort being put into enhancing the current A46? I used it this morning. I use it sometimes when I come to County Hall. It seems a perfectly adequate route, apart from the fact it needs to be bigger, wider. It needs to have hard shoulders, with all these accidents that keep occurring on it, breakdowns. But apart from that, it's got plenty of land either side. I would have thought you'd be able to fit in, don't know how many thousand houses, but a fair number. I'm just intrigued really as to why the southern route is put in the plan rather than an option of looking at another route.
Anybody else on transport? And then the officers can answer. We're all happy on transport. Right, so... Oh, sorry, Michael.
Yes, Chairman. Two questions, really. One is about the Barden Relief Road, which we desperately need, and surely that must be part of the strategic plan. And also, any plans to help regenerate North West Leicestershire and also reduce congestion and reduce pollution, then you've got to have something like the Ivanhoe line, which it completely and utterly makes sense because it will address those three major issues: congestion, pollution, and also regeneration.
So, going to answer that. Oh, sorry.
Trevor.
Are you wanting to sort of... I was going to bring you in at the end, Trevor, to respond to anything you want to say.
Whatever you want, Chairman.
Is that... I think,
whatever you say, Chairman.
okay, right. We're on transport. Kevin's raised a point about the alternatives. Now, I've raised this with Anne before. There is a document called the A46 Corridor Study, which is TFEM, and in there it refers to looking at exactly what Kevin's identified, which is an upgrade of the A46 between the M1 Junction 21A and Hobby Horse. What is the status of that, and how is that going to be taken forward?
Thank you, Chair. So on the 7th of November, when we received the published A46 study from Midlands Connect, exactly as you've described, Dr. Feltham, you have to look at all of your options and then go, which is the best one? I would just say is the A46 isn't just about the A46. One of the parts there's a study is you have to go through Junction 21, which is one of the weakest links on the motorway network at the moment and the most susceptible to resilience problems. You know, someone sneezes on a mobile phone going through there in the morning and we all suffer for the next 4 hours. So it's about building resilience for the network as well. The section of the A46 down to the Hobby Horse, which you know had a major upgrade only a few years ago, is now at the point where you start looking at what are the major infrastructure you need to do at Junction 21, the A46, for the benefits you'll get, and then you go, okay, what is the best option to go for, which is the one that we've been suggesting is the new road around the bottom, because basically the A46 is full around the top, and for most people who use it of an evening or a morning know that. So, but the study will go through all of those because you have to discount all of the options, otherwise very sensible people ask you the question of why not. So that's on that one. Regarding the Barden Relief Road, I presume I'll make sure we're referring to the right road here. This is the road that punches through off the current A511 and then links down to the roads at the bottom. That is part of our infrastructure plan and part of the 40-odd million that I mentioned when I was referring to Councillor Einan's comments. We are looking to pursue, as you know, a number of infrastructure improvements around that whole corridor, apart from maybe one in Hugglescote, which I believe we're not doing any work on, just to reiterate that. We've already done two major bits of infrastructure improvement, Junction 22 on the M1 and Junction 13 on the A42. Those were the key first ones up. You've then got Flying Horse and every other roundabout as you work along, plus the road down through to the estates as well. That is all part of a package of measures we're trying to pursue now. So just to reiterate there, it's not off the table. It is a strategic piece of infrastructure we need to deliver. And finally, down to the Ivanhoe line, thanks to the work we've done and will continue to keep updating, we know an awful lot about how and what you have to do to bring the Ivanhoe line to a working, sensible, paying for itself passenger railway line. Someone needs to gift us a few £100 million and then a subsidy as it stands at the moment of around £4 to £5 million a year. However, that doesn't mean we don't pursue it at every opportunity. So you picked up the question about HS2. One of the things we know will happen on HS2 is they will use an awful lot of the existing freight lines to bring in a lot of the aggregates and everything else they need to do to build the new railway line. They will be using the Barden line to do that. What we've said is, will you be upgrading it as part? Because if you're going to use this much traffic over it, surely it can't take it. So we will take. I don't know where people get the idea that we don't want to reopen the Barden line. It's just someone needs to give us an awful lot of money so we can upgrade it, and then give us a lot of money so we can subsidise it. Part of the work we did do showed you needed, and now correct me if I'm wrong, I'm going from memory, about 66,000 new homes along that corridor to generate the passengers that would make it level on its just running costs. So there's an awful lot we know. We will continue to keep trying to ask the question of, can someone open it up for us? But it's quite a big ticket item.
Right, Trevor.
Thank you, Chair. I'm indebted to... Thank you, Chair.
Anything you wish to.
Oh, steady. I'm absolutely indebted to Ian for covering those last two items which Michael brought up, because I know it's dear to his heart as a local member, and I've always been able to assure him that it's on the map and we will not let it go as the local planning lead member. That said, one of the things which this strategic plan will do, make sure that Colville continues to be a growth area. From that point of view, we will place a lot of, when we get to local plan area, and I realise, Chairman, I'm straying a little bit down to the detail, but we do want to look carefully at making sure that we don't torpedo in any way the Burton line, that we do keep the option open, build the infrastructure and build the need by putting more housing there to actually justify it in the long term. So that's where we're at. Can I just respond, Chairman, quickly to appropriate housing need, bearing in mind that we're housing market led here, and whilst we might, of course, always say to local developers, build appropriate housing at local plan level, we do. But if they can't sell big 3-bedroom ones, and you're very, very clearly making the case that maybe they're not always appropriate, although they do make the most profit, in the end, they'll go broke. And so, they'll sooner or later commercially scratch their collective heads and say, do you know what, we might need to build slightly less ambitious and more appropriate housing if that's in the local need, which the local plan will actually bring about. I think, Chairman, I'm quite happy with the thrashing that the vision for growth in Leicestershire's being given, and I'm absolutely delighted that I believe it will become more concrete as local plans are adopted and underpin it, which I think is the most important thing really to say here. And there's terrific flexibility in the local plan process to be able to bring that about. Finally, and then I'm done, Leicestershire, because of this, is ahead of anywhere nationally. We are so slick and good. We are attracting lots of money in off the back of this plan, and if we get this strategy right, which I believe we do, and we have, then we'll attract even more. And that, at last, for the East Midlands, is what we need to be doing. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, thank you very much. Brenda Seaton.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to start off by saying thank you to Dave. Although, as a member, I've sat through countless, I don't know how many, presentations of this plan. But I think you covered it very nicely at the end with the uncertainty and being able to respond, turn off and turn on the housing, transport and that, to be reactive to certain developments. I am quite surprised in the comments from the consultation that there wasn't anything regarding the ageing population and the housing needs there. But I'm sure it's covered. I know we've got Hedna, but I would have liked a bit more emphasis on the need for housing that reflects that. And I'm sure there was something. Oh yes, when it came to scrutiny in 2014, one of the comments was the further consideration should be given to the importance of green wedges as part of the work. But I've not seen anything in the the notes where it's altered or been amended, where the green infrastructure has has made a prominence on that. But as I say, thank you very much for making the presentation. I think it's quite hard getting my head around it being a strategy. It's a framework, as you said, and it's something to hang things on in the future. And thank you very much.
Okay, do you just want to respond on those couple of points?
Thank you. Yes, what you've said about older people really goes back to the point that this person was raising earlier about there seems to be no great tie-up between the population change and the household change. The reason for that is that massively the new households going forward are accounted for by over 65s, and particular older 65s who are living longer and ending up in single-person households. So yeah, that is a major influence in terms of the household formation statistics, and it's something which needs to be thought through further in terms of persuading the development industry, or in their absence, if they won't respond to it, somebody else to address the particular issues that come about as a result of that housing need.
Can I just come back then on that point? Because this is a strategic framework plan, should that not, because it's not just for us, it's for the developers as well, should that not be in here, that the developers need to consider that, or should HEDNA be stronger in that case?
HEDNA does highlight the issue, so it is in there. But what's happening at the moment is that is being translated by each of the individual districts and boroughs in their local plan processes, and the need to address that issue of older people's housing is being picked up there. There is specific now planning practice guidance at a national level, which again emphasises the importance of that particular thing. So it should come through as a much stronger feature in plans as we go forward. And the other point was on the green wedges, wasn't it? Yeah, the green wedges were identified as an important component of the overall sort of value of the landscape of Leicestershire via the Green Landscape and Green Infrastructure Study, which supports this strategic plan. So that was a piece of work done by land use consultants, and that did pick up on that. The methodology for identifying and reviewing green wedges is something which has been around for quite a long time in Leicestershire, and that is being looked at by the planning officers at the moment to make sure that that methodology is up to date and valid, and if it isn't, there will be a review of it.
Thank you very much.
That is something we raised when we looked at the draft earlier. Yeah, green wedges, historically very important in Leicestershire. Alan, did you want to come back?
I do, yeah. Just a couple of things. One of the things we have to be very careful of is the inequality of, we talk about social housing, the inequality of the gap. The problem is to actually research it. It is difficult because if you got an example of Bournemouth, unless you take from birth to death, there's migration, and people with money will migrate to live in nice places, correct? So the issue we've got in our market towns is that actually recent research clearly indicates that they're very expensive. Houses are more expensive in our market towns than the bigger towns and villages. They're more expensive. This means the lands are more expensive. This means we have a population who can afford it, most probably the ageing population. And if you just have to look at maps, that we have a migration out of the cities to live in these areas because they can afford it. So it is a complex situation, how we monitor and how we get the statistical evidence in regard to this migration, the ageing population, how we move around and how we handle it. I'm sure you understand that, but I think we need to be aware of, it's not a clear gap that, well, that area is poor because of it. It's actually a lot more complex than you know, we've got to go from age to the death and then how people migrate, and that's important how we develop our communities.
Okay, I'll take that as a comment. We've had nearly 2 hours on this, so I think we've done a very good thrashing was the word I think the chairman used. Rosemary has made copious notes. I think if one theme has come out, just to repeat that, it doesn't say very much about the triggers for a review, and I think that is something. I mean, I would agree that is something we want to say to the Cabinet. That we're only one authority, obviously, in this, but that is something we might wish to refer back to the MAG, that they actually set out the triggers or the things that would happen in order for a review to undertake. The only thing I wanted to mention was it came up last week. This announcement by the Chancellor about establishing, you'll have to remind me what the phrase is, up in the Toton area. It used to be a development zone, a development corporation. What is the implications of that if it goes ahead on this plan?
The announcement referred to setting up a development body that would cover the Toton station, but also the International Gateway area around the airport, and also Ratcliffe on Soar Power Station, which is going to be decommissioned from 2025. It's early days in terms of understanding exactly what that body will do, because it's in work being led by Midlands Engine, working with the government and the local authorities. We need to identify what the geography actually is going to be, and then what the functions of that development body are going to be. So one of the key issues, for example, it will be whether that body has planning powers or not, and that those planning powers are taken away from the local authority that have those sites on them and held by the development body. What in terms of this plan, I think that is a body that will help deliver some of the essential development and infrastructure that's likely to happen in those areas. So clearly there's a lot of growth pressure with the HS2 station being built. We know about all of the activity around East Midlands Airport, and then there's clearly a need to maximise the economic benefit from those developments, but also making sure that the right infrastructure is in place, but also that going back to one of the comments made earlier, that things like the skills issues are being addressed as well. So what it will what I would expect it will do, it will bring some real focus to those challenges in that area, and give the East Midlands something which is recognised by government as a major national initiative, which will stand up alongside some of the things that are happening in the West Midlands and in the Northern Powerhouse area.
Okay. So we're going to have to keep an eye on that, how it develops. Okay.
Keep an eye on it, but also I think the county council's going to be actively involved in shaping that too.
Okay.
With the LEP.
I'm just reminded by Rosita that early on you, Alan, raised the issue of the consultation process.
I was going to mention, because it's not been answered, has it?
Do you want to be clearer about what you want to say to the Cabinet about that?
I just think we need to look at the process, that's all, because it's not working. It would be bonkers if we're going to sit here getting 500 response, we're saying. Irrespective if we work with the districts, then they aren't working, we're not working with them well, whatever. We need to look at the process and get better at it. Is there new methods? I don't know. Communication and has changed dramatically. We all know that. It's very complex. I just think we need to look at to get better feedback from people. Maybe some people don't think it's the most exciting thing in the world. Then let's make it exciting. I don't know. Let's jazz it up a bit. We somehow have to get engaged, and the engagement with our residents and population is crucial, so we represent them properly. That's all.
Okay. Thanks for that. Right, so we've had a very comprehensive discussion. We've got a lot of comments to formulate, and we've flagged up the key issue of consultation, that really the numbers across the whole county were actually quite low. And secondly, the plan could be clearer about the circumstances in which a review would need to be undertaken. We're all happy with that, plus obviously everything else that has been noted down. Can I thank the officers for attending and giving a very good account of the situation. I'm sure this is something we will come back to, not least in terms of monitoring what doesn't happen. And thank you very much. I suggest we have a quick break and then we move on to the other items on the agenda. Can I say a 5-minute?
Yeah. Tom, can we have
5?
Yeah. Can we have a link to the government consultation you were talking to, which came out on Friday? Yeah, and then we can all feed it.
Okay, so we'll be back at 12:05. Right, moving to item 9 then. Welcome to Lonick. It's going to take us through the County Council draft obligations policy, a refresh and rehash of that. But can I say this is Lonick's last meeting? Certainly to this Scrutiny Commission. He's leaving the authority. I can't remember how long you've been here, but it's a long, long time. And can I thank you for the advice and style in which you have addressed this meetings and many other meetings, particularly the work you do for the Reg Board. And thank you very much, Lonick. I know you're moving on to Pastors New. I think you're going to the other side, as some has said.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I'm not sure about the other side, but certainly a different side. Thank you, Chairman, for that. I think my last meeting might be the Scrutiny meeting on the 14th. I think I've got another. Well, if you need me for the unitary status debate, I think. Yeah. But we shall see. Yes, so you're quite right. This is a review of the planning obligations policy, last adopted in 2014. It's being updated to reflect some of the changes that have happened since then, particularly the MPPF and new planning policy guidance, and also in the light of experience and new data that we've had. The key changes are set out in paragraph on page 80 for you in paragraph 16, and there are really four main changes. One is new data on education and pupil yield, a better way of sort of targeting sustainable transport usage, a more holistic approach to waste management infrastructure, and for the first time setting up some metrics for the delivery of social care infrastructure where this is justified. It's coming to you as part of the consultation process, and that will be begun in the next week or so, and then it'll go back to Cabinet in the new year and finally to County Council for full adoption. That's a brief outline, Chair. I'll take any questions the members may have.
Geoffrey.
Chair, thank you very much. I find this complicated over the years, and I find it difficult to see that things ever happen. I talk as a member of a local authority that was proud to I received a paper here saying that from the CCG it had received nothing over the last 5 years, not one penny. And I'm concerned that our residents get their fair share of any 106 money. And the question I want to ask basically is on education and schools. We've got about 500 new houses going up in Oadby, and I don't know how many in the Wigston side, for schools. And I understand that there'll be a contribution of 106 money for provision of schools. But the way the system seems to work, it won't be for local children. Because when a school builds an extension or extra facilities are available and there are extra school places, they immediately have to be put out to offer for anybody that wants to go to the school. They can't reserve the school places for the houses that are going to be built. So it struck me that it doesn't matter how big you make the local schools in Oadby, unless you actually tie them in for when the houses are occupied, and you know when you build houses, 10 become available, 20 become available, and it doesn't stick with the school term or the way the bureaucrats in the education department want it to work. So it strikes me that we'll be providing with the 106 money we get school places for the children that are trying to escape from the school system in the city. Is there any way around it, and what can we do about it?
Chairman, do you want me to answer that? Yeah, I think it's always a little bit tricky, and you've hit on quite a difficult problem that does often arise. But the way we sort of try to handle that is try to have some trigger points in the agreement to make sure that the money and the delivery of the classroom is timed in an appropriate manner. It doesn't always work because it's not a perfect system. This is a particular problem when you've got a brand new school on a new estate and you're waiting for the estate to build, you work out when you build the school. Do you build it at the beginning or do you build it at the end? And if you build it at the end, where are the kids going in the meantime? So it's always a tricky one. So it's that balance to make sure that there's overall capacity provision that comes out of that development. It's phased properly, and there are some appropriate trigger points in the agreement to make sure that it's delivered in a timely manner. It's not perfect, but that's probably about the best we can do.
Anthony, are you able to add anything?
I just want to come in and just to remind members in terms of when education colleagues make these requests for matters to be included in a Section 106 agreement in terms of money to be provided for new school provision, be it primary or secondary, that the school, once constructed, in terms of any admissions, will be governed by the school's admissions policy, which you'll find some little details on page 105 of the documents. And that sets out, if you like, the priority order. And obviously, catchment of the school is one of the key things. So in response to Mr. Kaufman's really point, that shouldn't really be happening. And if there are any concerns, you do need to perhaps take them up with the education colleagues, just to make sure, is there some sort of mismatch going on? Because it shouldn't be right for people to have to move in to get places if they're not in the catchment of the school that's getting the money.
Well, it's a serious problem that's happening in Oadby, and I understand that all schools on the perimeter of the city are suffering the same problem. I'm aware of 70-odd appeal cases where people living in Oadby can't get in mid-term because the schools are full up. We as a local authority have a duty to provide school places. I think it's about time the government realised and changed the system to allow them, for the local authorities to decide catchment areas and not leave it to the schools to fight this. It's like the Wild West as far as the schools are concerned at the moment, and it seems to be they're working for the benefit of the schools rather than for the people they're providing the service for. Thank you.
Okay, I've got Kevin next.
Thanks, Chairman. I'm on to highways and transportation. And having had quite a lot of housing, way more than Jeff's been talking about in my patch, one of the things that helps mitigate some of the issues is that the new people moving in get offered travel packs. The residents don't seem to know about them. We had a lot of trouble with a bus going through one of the new estates, double-decker bus, and people kept moaning at me about the fact they didn't want to be getting dressed in the morning and have people going past their bedroom windows. And I said, well, you were all informed about this when you bought the house. No, we weren't. We never had any news about this. And I had words with David Wilson Homes, as it was, that was the developer. And they said, well, they're in the brochure that we hand out to people. It doesn't seem as if they're sort of pushing it very hard. Obviously, ultimately, if they don't spend the money on the travel packs, presumably we give it back to them. I think somehow there needs to be a bit more compulsion, if possible.
I'd understood this part was being looked at again. I'd picked up some discussion at the cabinet that we were going to look at particularly in the context of having to hand some of the money back.
That's right, Chairman. You remember back in the summer there was a lot of publicity about how much money the county council gave back, and that was round the public transport issue, and particularly around bus passes, and that really stemmed back from practices that were in place quite some years ago, because these take a long time to feed through. I think these days we try to be a bit smarter in the way we've sort of promoted, but it is important to keep promoting the public transport issue. So the way the policy is worded now, it's a bit more circumspect, so we've got a bit more flexibility in how we promote bus passes, and that's really be a matter on a case-by-case basis, really.
And that will be the officer who comments back to the local planning authority on the transport implications will pick that up. There's usually a list of things they're asking for. So when you say it on a site-by-site basis, we would expect to see that feeding through in terms of what we're asking for in public transport on this new policy, would we?
Yes, Chairman, I'm hoping that's right. I mean, the way it operates is that this policy is a corporate document to make sure that we are coordinated, but each service area will obviously make an assessment of how they think the mitigation needs to be handled, and in that respect, that is something that we done at that time. Yeah, we try to avoid paying back the money if we possibly can. Yes.
Right, Alan.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of things. You've got your consultation, which started on October to December, and again, it's the consultation that's online. And we've talked about the effectiveness of consultation, so it'd be nice to get some quick feedback to see what responses we're getting. With it being online, one of the complaints I do get, since we've got an ageing population, a lot of our older population don't like doing surveys online. They like either a paper or somebody to knock on the door and say, can I fill this form in? I don't know whether we can do that. But so I'm just, again, a little bit concerned regarding the consultation. You've advertised the date. I can't, have we seen any, have you got any adverts yet or anything? Or so it says here you've been advertising and we're already into November. So I know you'll answer that in a second. The other issue is you've mentioned government agencies. One of our hardest acts is to actually communicate with the CCGs. I mean, I've got on Thursday I've got a birthing unit potentially they're trying to close down without a proper consultation, and they've been forced into, I think. And I'm really concerned about what the CCGs are doing, the way they're not buying into plans, how they're not listening to us, and how we have to engage with them, or somehow they're very powerful. They don't talk millions, they talk billions. You're aware of that. So I really, we have to look at, because I'm really concerned.
Alan, I think you need to pursue this through health scrutiny. We've got the chair here as to getting an item on their agenda.
But you've still got a consultation here.
Yeah, but this is about, I'm not disagreeing with you at all, but this is about the county council's Section 106 policy in respect to county council services and what they're asking the district and boroughs to provide when an application is considered. You're talking about what the health authorities, how they feed into that or don't feed into it.
Well, they do. I mean, they do into 106, you're aware, but it's how we have to have some control how it's spent. Yeah. And how, if we're increasing, we've talked about population increase, we're talking constantly of transport. And if in reality we took with the term here is sustainable transport, well, that means actually we don't run bus service because they're not sustainable. So sometimes we have to be real what we're offering. What we're saying is we need more influence on that 106 because the health will grab it and spend it basically.
And what I'm saying is that this is something that several members have raised now, is that our health scrutiny committee that actually has the right to have health professionals in front of them should be raising this issue with them and trying to get some clarity and some commitment from them to this Section 106 process, because I think it is getting a bit vague. You're not the first member to mention it.
Okay, that's fair enough. As long as it's noted, I feel quite strong about it.
Yeah.
And I do. I think Terry sits at meetings as well, and Jeff, we go to meetings. Many of the senior people from public health, or not public health, CCGs don't turn up. We always get somewhere down the line, so we really want to put them under the microscope. So I do think we need to pursue it.
Okay. Lonnie, can you deal with the first point?
Yeah, thank you very much. We've had a slight delay in starting the consultation, so it hasn't quite started yet. So we're just gearing up for that, and it'll be a targeted consultation. So we'll target the stakeholders directly, which is what we did last time, because they are the key stakeholders, in particularly the developers and the other agencies and the local planning authority. So it's important to get those on board. So as soon as that's started, it'll be announced, and there'll be a time period for us to respond to.
So you meant the consultation on point 6, it says general public. What does that mean? I'm a bit confused.
Yeah, that will be just an online. There'll be some publicity around that, and then people will be invited to respond online. But we haven't really got the resources to target everybody in Leicestershire.
Right. Okay. So, we need to get down to this because this is confusing me. When I read this, general public means the whole of Leicestershire. Am I right or wrong? I don't know. Is it right? Generally, isn't it? So I think, well done.
Yep.
So I think we need the term. I read that it was stakeholders and the general public.
Yes.
That means everybody.
But Alan,
now we're changing the.
Sorry, Alan, may I interrupt you? The point is, if we are talking about a consultation in regards, I see your point, but this consultation for Section 106 is more directed to the stakeholders, i.e. district councils and whatever else. And as Lonick said, he is directing them directly because this is a Bible to us councillors and the planning authorities because it's Section 106, so it is not general public.
No, I understand that. I totally understand it.
And we will pick up the point of consultation via scrutiny, and Kevin just nodded in regards to health scrutiny. Rosemary has made a point.
Okay.
So your points are noted.
So
and
we're going to take out the
them.
term general public then. There's no point having it there. Or available.
Targeted, it says.
All right.
I think your point's made.
Yes.
I think your point is made. Terry Einan.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, a very useful and comprehensive piece of work, and I'm most pleased to see the section starting on page 92 on adult social care and health, and that we are finally going to try and get some contributions for that. I think the section on major adaptations contributions, to me that makes a lot of sense, in that dwellings who do not provide the required design mitigation will be asked for a contribution, and it looks like 7,000 odd for that. To me, that looks like the threat rather than a promise, that actually, if you're a developer, hopefully it will encourage you to focus the mind and build your houses in such a way so that they're easy to adapt. So we may not see much money from that, but that would probably be a good thing. To me, that one's straightforward. I'm a little bit concerned about the one where it says where there is a shortage of SL homes or where there is a shortage of EC homes, because I've got no definition of what a shortage means, and there's that to me is a risk that they will come back to us and say, well, you don't have a shortage, so we've got to be able to prove that. And the other question I wanted was, when are we going to trigger this? I would have assumed that the major adaptations would be triggered, you wouldn't have to wait for a trigger. The idea is every house should be adaptable, or we want the money. And I would assume that would be the same, there would be no trigger for extra care and supported living. And again, hopefully that would act as an incentive to developers to ensure someone pulls their finger out and develops us one.
Okay, Lonick.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, yes, you're quite right. This is a new venture for us, and part of the interest will come back from the consultations to see how this is received or not received by the developers. And it'll be I think a moving fee. So we're trying this out. This is the first time we've tried these metrics. Other counties have done it, but not many have done it this way. So we've modelled this on a Cumbria version. And you're quite right, if a developer can build houses and provide the adaptations up front, that's better actually, because it saves us collecting the money and doing something about it. And you heard in the previous item that the new MPPF actually puts a requirement on local planning authorities to be a bit smarter in terms of the type of housing they are planning for, and particularly housing for older people. So that should come through in future local plans. And so this ties in to that really. And in terms of the shortage, we always have to demonstrate, perhaps it's not the greatest of terms, but similar in education, it's a parallel there, that you can't just ask for money for schools if that school next door is empty or half full. So you have to net off what the need is compared to what you've got. So the social services have said there is a need, but there are some places available. So in any given circumstances, they will have to assess this development will create this need. Can this need provided? Are there places available? If not, then we'll make a claim. I think that's the general way it works.
Okay, Bill Crooks.
Thank you, Chairman. Just picking up on the 106 monies for travel packs and transport. There are places and estates in my area that have been started off by being provided by travel packs and encouraging to use bus services, but the bus services have now disappeared, you know, and they're being isolated by it. So I think sometimes developers are getting away with being able to build in the middle of nowhere, and at the end of the day, if the bus companies take the services out, there's nothing people can do, and people are left there, you know, just no means at all. So I think we need to look at that carefully when we're recommending development as viable, because like I say, in rural areas those buses can disappear. In fact, one's gone from my area and there's another one being threatened, so there could be several villages with no services.
It's the problem is the changing situation, isn't it? That you can be at a position when you grant planning permission or when the request for 106 goes in, 6 months, a year later, that service could be withdrawn or unviable. And that's the sort of circumstances you then have to hand the money back, don't you? Because there isn't a service in order to give the packs out on. There is no answer, is there?
No, I mean, the packs don't last a long time. I think they're only there sort of for 6 months to encourage it. But you're right, unless the authority, unless there's a contribution made to subsidise that bus service, but it won't be an ongoing subsidy. It'll be something that will start it off. And if it's not commercially viable in the end, it won't happen.
It's a good point, Bill, but I'm not sure within the rules how we can address it. Hilary.
Thank you very much. I'd like to bring to your attention, Lonick, if I may, to the libraries. Always a favourite topic of mine. I think literacy and the use of libraries is most vital. And I noticed that on page 135, it sort of gives us the statistics, which were roughly about what we know: 16 county council funded libraries and up to 35 libraries, which are mainly in rural areas, which are being managed by the communities and now under the new formats of the, what are they called, the special community, you know what the words I'm trying to mean, it's a company, isn't it, a community interest company. What I'm really interested in is on page 138, under the contributions for capital costs or revenue. Now, we already know that I think there's about 36 libraries by the end of, 33 libraries by the end of this year will be managed by local communities. But I'm a bit disappointed here to see that under the second paragraph, it says that will be sought for the library that will be most affected by a proposed development. This is not necessarily the local community library, bearing in mind now that most of the county libraries are in big towns or are more bigger developed. But where the expansions are taking place is where it's the community interest libraries, the community library. But it rather reads that they're not going to get much money or some money from 106. And yet the amount of effort, bearing in mind that most of these libraries are run by volunteers and the way they're running them now is absolutely fantastic. I know in the area I cover, either as a borough council or as a county council, there are 3 that are running very successfully this way, and they're doing all sorts of things besides books. They're having meetings and clubs, and schools are going in there. I would like to know, is this set in stone? The catchment populations are identified using postcode data. Now, if they say it's only going to be LE11, for example, that will cover Loughborough, which already has a very big library and well used. If it's LE12, that starts to cover the villages that are looking after themselves almost now. Some of them now, particularly as you probably know, Barrow upon Soar, it's coming up to its second or third year, so it's now really looking after itself, as is Quorn and Sowerby. So I'd just like a bit of clarification And I think also, Lonica, it's been brought to your attention about page 140. If that is true, I'm delighted to see that much money is coming into the community. No, if you could just, is there any wriggle room for this? Rather than it all go to Loughborough, when really it's needed outside, where the development's taking place. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Just, thank you for that error on page 140. Yes, it's we'll get that amended. Thank you. The focus will be on the main libraries, just because that's the way the structure of the library service has gone. But that doesn't preclude a case being made, if a case can be made, for provision for those smaller libraries. And I know in the past we have tried to do that. The problem with library Section 106 is that developers, I think they're conflicted here, because on one hand, often it's not that much money that's being asked for because of the nature, but on the other hand, they argue against it, that it's not justified under the SIL regulations and the SIL rules. So it's always a little bit hit and miss on libraries, if the truth be told, because that is the practice. But it's not completely lost. So that's why it's worded in that way. So we have an opportunity to do something if there's a case to be made in those areas.
Simon. Well, because it also links into what other people have been talking about, which is transport. So if the small libraries, which serve the whole community, are not getting the funding, that the big library in the town 4 miles away, but there's no bus routes, or a convenient bus route, or the bus routes don't go near the library, which is one end of town, and the buses all stop at the other. And bearing in mind the type of people that are using the libraries, I really do think this needs to be kept on the burners, if I may.
Thank you, Chairman. That's a very good point. That goes right to the heart of, we should be only approving sustainable development, and that means sustainable in all its aspects. And the problem that we often get is that local planning authorities are under immense pressure to get housing development through. And although we may ask for all these elements to make those developments sustainable, they have to make a judgment about the need versus other factors. But you're quite right. I mean, strictly speaking, they should all be included to make the whole development sustainable.
Thank you.
Maggie.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm going to go back to extra care and supported living, because I'm really confused around the provision and the strategy, actually, because given we've got an ageing population and we've lost convalescent homes, etc., and extra care for older people gives a real good alternative to short stay residential care, etc. I'm just confused how we can, or should we be, influencing the provision more. I just wanted a bit of clarity around it. I just don't understand the process and the influence we have on it.
Yes, thank you. This is, again, quite a new area for me, so I'll try my best, Chair, to explain this, but this has come from the service department, as I said, based on current practice elsewhere in the country. I think in the past we've been quite poor at asking for some contribution to mitigate any impact that housing development might have on social care. You'll see from the numbers that the prevalence of need is quite low in compared to, say, to education. But nevertheless, there is an element in that I think we should at least try to attempt to get some funding and some analysis of what that impact will be on development. Otherwise, the whole of the burden will fall on the county council. So this is an attempt to say, well, based on our current practice and our current way of doing things in Leicestershire, this is what we think we could have a first stab at asking for. I think this will develop as we go along, because this is the first time that we're going to do this, and we'll see what the reaction is from developers, and particularly from local planning authorities. I don't think we'll get a reaction from local planning authorities, because that is now firmly in the National Planning Policy Framework, that we have to look at these things. I'm sorry, I can't be too clear on the technicalities of it, because I'm not familiar with it enough to answer the detailed question.
But it is an evolving process then, hopefully. Thank you.
It is, Chairman, yes.
Okay, I've got Jeff Kaufman wants to come back.
Yeah, just quickly, Chair. I have to agree with the comments of Councillor Pearson. On the consultation, I'm surprised that we're not consulting with the CCG on this, and also the police. I mean, if we say, well, they put their own 106 money in, and the fact they're not doing it, take it to whatever the health scrutiny, okay. I accept that, and we can criticise them there, but I would have thought when we're dealing with our own 106, they should have been on the list, them and the police. But that's just a comment. But it's this thing with the bus passes and trying to do something to improve the lot of now young couples moving to bigger estates. I see it with my own son. He's moving to somewhere in Scraptroff in your division, Chair. And I've been saying, well, what happens if you go to work or your car's not available? How do you get into work? And it struck me over an hour to get into the city on some winding bus route, which seems to finish for any effective service early in the evening. Now, over the years, we've tried in Oadby when we've had a housing estate. We've used some 106 money to pay for them to put a bus on for a year or 6 months. But what they did was they made the bus service so inconvenient and awkward to use that nobody used it, and they said, look, we've proved it, it's not wanted. I have another son who lives in London, and you can genuinely live there without a car. He could have his car parked up for a week and not use it. We've got to be a bit more creative. I haven't got a creative mind, but for this 106 money and providing transport on these estates, we've really seriously got to do something, because if we want people to get out of the car, now that's the only way to provide a bus service after 6 o'clock at night, even in Oadby. You know, if you want a bus after 6 o'clock, you really have to fight and find out when it's running, because if you miss it, you can ruin the whole evening. Now, is there a way of looking if any other authorities have managed to be more creative, or what we can do about this in the future? Because it's patently not working at the moment.
Lolly?
Chair, if I'm not sure about how creative other authorities are, but talking about creative minds, Ian Veers is still in the room, Chairman. If he's happy and you're happy for him to help on this question, he might have some.
We're always happy to hear from Ian. I'm just conscious. I'm conscious of the time. It is 20 to 1, and we have two more important, well, three really important reports. There is an option to break at 1 o'clock and have some lunch and come back, but some of you might object to that, or we can just carry on. But we'll carry on. Okay.
Just carry on.
Right. Excuse me. Can I? Yeah. As I know Ian's here as well, but as chair of transport in it, I could answer some of the questions as well.
Okay. Well, I've got
so
you
it doesn't just have to be officers all the time.
Got you down to come back. Yeah. I've got you down to come back, Alan. Yeah. So, Ian, powers to get more money from developers for public transport.
Okay, I've been listening to the debate and chaffing, and I'm so glad Lonick invited me up to come for another thrashing, probably. Obviously, you've seen the things in the recent papers about monies being back for travel packs and so forth, and Lonick explained a lot of those from 10 years ago, and there are a lot of things that we're constantly trying to do different, but we do have to operate within the planning framework, which is not always conducive to helping us trying to achieve all the things that I know members and locals want. So some of the things we are doing now, instead of saying specifically, because we have to name the items we want, because we have to justify how it mitigates the development, but we try and wrap them up in a whole pot of sustainable contribution. So we ask for monies for bus services, knowing that they might change over the next 5 to 10 years of the delivery of the development, but we don't then lose the money, as happened with Kevin's area, where we had to give £1/3 back because the bus service became sustainable, so the subsidy wasn't needed anymore. What we're now trying to get is, within the rules, how we can keep that in the pot and then use it for other things as well. So we're doing that on some of the developments that are going on in Melton. So we're trying to be more creative on how we actually ask within the rules of the SIL regulations. It's quite interesting, even recently, so I'll use Lubberthorpe as a big example, probably the one that most people are aware of, being built out near Leicester Forest East, Kirby Muxloe. They have in there the normal conditions about providing travel packs and so forth, and they're very good at promoting them. But they also have to provide bus services to a certain extent for the next 5 years, and that's all you can do dependent on the triggers, because that's the way it's always been done in the past. We're currently working with them on, okay, if that's the normal way of doing it, and we normally know the result that achieves, which is in 5 years' time, the bus service and where it goes, all of Mr. Crooks's comments, they're actually looking at bringing in something called Arriva Click, which is a more demand-responsive app-based, but they may have a call centre as well, where people can actually ring up and book their transport rather than have regular services running. I think what's going to happen in the next 5 to 10 years, which is what our new passenger transport policy shows, is people's transport habits and providing transport for people's needs to be more creative and in different ways. It won't be about, although it could be, a traditional bus running down this road at this time for these reasons. It can be more responsive, it can be more demand-led, it can be much more flexible. So the very good developers are actually already coming back to us and saying, I would like to do something different because I'm here for the next 20 years delivering out my houses, and I want to make it as attractive as possible by providing services. The ones who are smaller and just come in, do, go, that's a bit of a harder conversation. But if we can influence and change what's happening on public transport provision, 94% of all public transport is already delivered commercially. If we can make that as high as possible, less strain on public resources, it's their business that they're making profit in. It's up to us to try and create that environment where they can make money but also provide what our residents really need. So we are got those creative thinking hats on. We have, as part of our passenger transport policy review, scoured not only this country but others on the things you can do different. So when we are talking to communities about how you can provide transport, we will just give them ideas and options on what they may wish to do as well if it's not going to be a bus service. That's going to be the essence over the next few years. Hope that helped.
Okay, thanks for that. Alan, you want
No, Brenda first. Alan to sum up.
all right then, Brenda.
Because you can come in then with your all
Okay,
your
the vice chair is giving the direction.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Just by the way, with the about the buses, I think we have to be quite responsible here as well. And some of the cases we shouldn't offer it in the first place if it's going to be removed. But why we've got a bus in Thurmaston from a development that was happening in Mount Sorrel, I've got no idea. But the bus is there and it runs every hour, on the hour, empty. And it's the odd few. And obviously some people who catch the bus there now have a job in Loughborough. It takes about 3 hours to get to Loughborough, mind you. It goes through all the little villages. But that person, or 2-3 people, got the job in Loughborough. And then to suddenly take that away. So we have to be quite responsible of that, because those people probably wouldn't have got a job in Loughborough in the first place. So as I say, goodness knows why we had that service from a development in Mount Sorrel. But my comments are, one is a comment that I would like, I don't think you'll be able to answer this, but it's the extra care and supported living. We need to, it's on a needs basis, so there needs to be a robust way of finding out who needs that service. So do our social workers say that, there's 4 people in Charnwood that need extra care facilities? I'm only picking out the number 4, obviously. There'll be more than that, so that there is an actual register of need within that area. It's not just a figure that's guessed. So I think what I'm saying is there needs to be a robust way of calculating how many people need that extra care facility in those specific areas. And the other one is, I don't need extra care facilities yet, but when I'm no longer 21, I may need to move to a bungalow. and that there isn't anything in here, I don't think, and the Vice Chair's gone through it as well, and she tells me there isn't anything that mentions bungalows. Now, they're not extra care, they're just, you haven't got the stairs. I would like to know how we can, or if it's possible, to feed that in here at all. Thank you.
Yeah, the social service department will have an idea of what the needs are, because obviously they meet those needs now, and they will have a way of looking at the population and trying to predict what those needs might be in the future. And the way this is calculated is not what is the current need, but what will the proposed development, what are the statistical chances of that having an impact on social services. So you have to, a bit like the pupil places, you don't know how many children are going to come out of that development, but based on previous houses, you know that there are, it's a formula, and this is what we've put here. It's a formula. That's why it's an emerging element, and we'll see how this goes. So there's a formula based on our existing stats, and that's how we'll do it, and that's how we calculated it. In terms of bungalows and types of housing, I think that's quite difficult to do. Strictly speaking, developers should be building houses that are adaptive, and this has some policies around adaptations, but again, that's work we have to do along with the local planning authority. So when we respond to a planning application, it won't be just saying this is the formula and this is how much money we want. We could say, oh, by the way, could the proportion of this building or all of these designs they be designed in a way that will be future-proofed for people to live there for a long, long time. But whether the bungalows or not, it's probably unlikely to get that far. Thank you.
Right, Alan, you've got the floor.
Oh, thank you. Actually, Brenda brought it up, and I think I won't go on about the transport, because transport, we talk about it all the time, and it is complex. The issue is about not working in silos, because this is quite silo-ish. And when it comes down to communities and building, I was at a conference, and to give you an example, you will never see a step-in shower in Australia. So people can live in a house and get in a shower, and they're very big, because they try and build houses for life. There is a push, and this is where we need to put pressure with 106 and on these developers, that houses have proper rooms for both social housing and people who can afford the housing, that we have houses that are comfortable to live in. And I know there's some rules, but I'm not sure how well we enforce those rules, which worries. There is a when we look at the outside, and we've not really mentioned, I forget which page, the physical activity and what happens on the outside and what we provide for active living, both for young and old. And the more, 141. So the more we can encourage developers or pressure them or enforce them with the funding, or whatever we do, to build and have healthy environments, healthy living, healthy outdoors. I know it doesn't happen short term, but long term it's preventative. And I think, can you imagine we've got houses where people don't have to go into nursing homes, because it's two-story, you can have it adaptive, and I love that term. Let's make them adaptive. Let's say you don't have to leave the house. I've lived there 30 years. It's awful moving out. Have you ever done it? I've done it recently. It was awful. After losing my wife, you've got so much stuff. So people may want to be in an area for a long time and live there. And that makes actually prophesizing or understanding the population a little bit easier, because it's not moving all over the place. And I think we need to look at that. I've seen there is models. I'm sure you know this. There is models. They were presented at Westminster recently at a conference I went to. Some incredible models from different countries where they're building communities. They stay there. It's adaptive. They can grow old there, and it's very special. And they live a long time because they're healthier. And I think I would love that in Leicestershire.
Right, I'll take your comments. Thank you very much. Very, very helpful. Right, I've just got Rosita now, and then I think we need to move on.
Yes, and I'm very short because most of everything's been said. Now, As everybody knows, we can't just nilly-willy ask for things. We need to prove need, and even then the developer might challenge this via a viability assessment. So what we need to encourage is that we have the evidence to prove our need, and I think that is a two-way process between county council and district council. And I think, I liked Ian's comment earlier, that we are more flexible within travel packs and bus passes, because one of my pet hates is to give a bus pass, a travel pack, and then there is no a bus. So I think we need more flexible to achieve a desired outcome. And with that in mind, to pick up Brenda's point again, I think maybe we could pass it on, because on page 93 and 94, paragraph 10, we talk about if we're calculating contribution for extra care, and then it finishes off with typically nationally the public subsidy is in the region of 50%, if you know, whatever. But if we can amend that slightly, if they can't do extra care, if they can't do anything like residential, but that they provide these bungalows which have the facilities where people who only have certain needs. And we also know that there are a lot of people with disabilities who want to be housed into a house and so they can live independently. And I don't think it has been worked in there quite rightly. So this is too narrow. If there is no extra care, we can give 50% to affordable housing. Then the developer says, well, no. So I think that just needs to be looked at. And I don't want to prolong it because I've got one more quick point. And I think it was page 7, and I don't understand that. Let me just find that very quickly. Oh, yeah, 5.4. You say monitoring of planning application, blah, 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 and you go, it's appropriate monitoring fee. Now, is this a monitoring fee to the developer, or in order to generate income, do we also discharge that and commission it out that we monitor for districts and charge them? That's not clear to me. And with that, thank you very much for a comprehensive report. It's a little Bible which I shall pass on. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Dominic.
Thank you, Chair. It's a very good point about flexibility, because when you talk about the extra care, you see where the way to word it is these are examples of what we could do on extra care. But during the negotiations here, this is the starting point. This is going to be the impact. But if a developer says, look, what if I did this instead? You might say, well, that might be all right. So I think you're quite right. I think there is flexibility in there, but we've got to have a starting point to start the negotiations. So we've got to have a lever to start with, and I think this does that. And in terms of the monitoring fee, that fee is to the county council for it to ensure that it makes sure that it knows where all the trigger points are, to collect the money at the right time, make sure the money goes to the right department and the development gets built.
For us only, we do not commission it out, say, i.e., so it's just for the county council and our section 106.
It's for the county council. There was a case in High Court which confused a lot of people, and Anthony might be able to explain this, but it's sort of said that you shouldn't be able to charge a monitoring fee because that should be part and part of your normal day-to-day operations. But I think what the judge actually said, you can charge a monitoring fee if you can justify it, and that's what we have to do, and that's why that's in there, because you have to justify why you need a monitoring fee.
Right, okay, so I think we've given this a good cover. What's going to happen at the end of the consultation then?
Yes, it'll once we've analysed the consultation, it'll come back to Cabinet for their view, and then adopted by the County Council.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. Thank you very much, Lonnie. Right, moving on then to item 10, Annual Delivery Report and Performance Compodium. And we've got joining us at the table Andy Brown, Performance Team Leader, and Richard Wilding, Performance Business Partner. And Tom Pennell. And you staying in, or?
Oh, he's
okay.
a devil for punishment.
Right, Ian Beers. Right, now, I understand you've got a presentation. How long would you like for that, or do you think you need? Okay. Yep, crack on.
Okay, conscious of the time, so I'll try and pick out the key points for you. The annual delivery report and performance compendium for 2018 is before you. It's in two parts this year, similar to last year, and we're keen to get your views on the usefulness of the content and how we've developed it this year. I think the message we had 18 months ago was that you wanted much more material around the impact of austerity on local services. With the mics, and we've looked to include more of that in the second half of the report now in terms of the performance compendium. So we've built more content into that this year to try and help the committee with understanding both the national and local service pressures, as well as including the delivery around the County Council's progress on its own priorities in the strategic plan in part one. So it's still structured in that same way. The first part on delivery progress has been restructured around the strategic plan, which was agreed by the Council 12 months ago. So it's structured in 5 themes and around those outcomes, highlights areas of delivery over the last 12 months, as well as some future plans moving forwards. We have established a strategic plan delivery group at officer level, a new commissioning approach, which has lead officers attached to the themes and chief officer sponsors. And that's particularly been focusing initially on the new housing delivery outcome around quality and affordable homes, which is one of the new themes that was agreed by the Council through the strategic plan. So Anne Carruthers is the chief officer sponsor and Simon Lawrence the lead officer, with a delivery group underneath that, which has been mapping out activity around housing delivery and coming up with a new approach and new plans. And some of that's covered in the report, and you'll be seeing more of that as that outcome becomes more established and delivers over the next few years. There's also a much larger section this year on communities delivery to reflect the theme on communities and the various outcomes in the strategic plan. So that's been refreshed to reflect the community strategy, and a lot of good work going on around that in terms of both environment and culture, the corporate communities team, the work in the communities side of adults and communities, and also through public health and local area coordinators. And that's an area that has to work quite a lot harder in terms of attracting resources and leveraging assets from communities, looking to support county council services by working with the voluntary community sector, rural sector, etc. There's still significant sections on delivery around economy and transport, and particularly around the capital side, where we have some significant capital resources that we've managed to attract through various schemes, through Section 106, and a very full capital programme. So that's still a full section on delivery, and some really good work going on around economy and transport, which you've heard about some of that today. Still a very full section around health and wellbeing delivery, some of that through the public health team, increasingly through the Better Care Fund and Improved Better Care Fund, health and care integration, working closely with CCGs and the health service, and also through the Adults and Communities Department. And there was some extra funding that came through this year through the increased council tax for adult social care to try and mitigate some of the pressures in that area. And then a more focused and targeted section around children and families, particularly around safeguarding and reflecting the more targeted role of that department now, particularly on safer communities. There's a much shorter section this year on key enablers. It's not because there's not a lot of work going on. I think it's because we've wanted to focus more on the outcomes this time. So in summary, in terms of the delivery part of the report, there is a real comprehensive set of activity going on linked to the outcomes right across the council. It is very focused and targeted, It is constrained by resources, so it's not saying that everything is improving and that everything is being delivered, but it is saying that we have a strong focus on those outcomes, and credit to all of the staff that are involved in looking to mitigate some of the funding reductions they've had and try and move forward the outcomes and manage any potential reductions. So I do see that looking across the council. I do see people are very busy and stretched by the resource situation at present, and we do know there's further reductions to come which will impact, which I'll pick up separately after Richard has run through some of the performance figures.
Thanks, Andy. What we've done is we've reviewed how the County Council performs compared to other local authority areas. And I'm going to give you a quick run through a sort of summary of that analysis. The work that we've done looks across all of the sort of themes of county council performance, and we've used data that's published nationally by respected sources such as the government, such as SIPFA, such as the LGA, and we've actually reviewed a total of 212 different performance indicators to look at how we perform across the wide range of council services. This slide that should be on the screen right behind and is in the performance compendium shows the county council's sort of pure performance position compared to other two-tier county councils over the past 6 years. It's based on the 2016-17 end of year position. We're still working to collate the figures for the year that's just ended. The slide shows Leicestershire as 6th overall out of 27 two-tier county councils. The authority's relative position dropped after 2012-13 when we were ranked 2nd overall, possibly due to the council having to move more quickly to reduce some service levels due to relatively low funding compared to other areas. However, over the last 2 years, we have seen an improvement in our overall rank. The next slide that I've got shows the same authorities but brings in spend per head. Now the vertical axis here shows performance rank, so higher performance is towards the top of the screen, and the horizontal axis shows net spend per head, with low spend to the right hand side and high spend to the left hand side. So high performance and low spend would be in this top right quadrant. So that's really where you would want to see yourself, and high spend and low performance is down here in the bottom left. So that's the area that you definitely would not want to be. We can see from this view we've got Leicestershire again. They're ranked 6th overall. In overall terms, we're the lowest spender per head of all of the 27 two-tier counties, and you can see that those other 5 authorities up here that have performed higher than us, for the most part, they have considerably higher funding per head, particularly Surrey is one of the highest funded authorities, so they are performing above us over there. The slides that follow, and I've picked out 6 or 7, they show sort of theme views to show how we're performing overall on a theme basis, using a basket of indicators that are relevant to that area. This slide covers the performance of the local economy. We've actually used overall spend per head because we didn't have a defined budget. It wasn't possible to get defined sort of spend areas on economic development across different local authorities, so we don't have specific budget figures for this. Just very briefly, we're ranked 8th out of 27 in terms of performance on the local economy. Compared to last year, we've got 3 indicators that have improved, covering business creation, business survival, and people with degree level skills and above. So we've improved in those areas. We've got 4 indicators that have showed small declines, and they cover job seekers allowance claimants, other skill levels, but they're not big changes really for this theme. The next area that I was going to cover is transport and highways. So we've got here a basket of actually 33 indicators which cover performance on transport and highways, and about 2/3 of those are drawn from the NHT survey, which is a big survey which is done gathering the residents' views on transport issues across the board. And across the bottom, we've got spend per head on transport and highways. So you can see here that Leicestershire's actually ranked second overall in terms of performance. But in terms of spend, we are the lowest spending bar one. So it's quite a significant achievement that we've got a very high level of performance, but we're actually spending a relatively modest amount of money on this area. We're still waiting for the survey results for the year that's just ended. They're due out imminently or about to be released. Of the indicators that we do know about, 3 have shown a slight improvement compared to last year and 2 have shown a slight decline. So it's a little bit hard to call how things might change in terms of our position on this theme for this year. The next area that I was going to cover was housing, so the affordable and quality homes sort of indicators. Across the bottom, we've got overall spend per head rather than a specific theme expenditure. We've used 10 performance indicators to sort of come up with our overall performance for this theme, and we're actually ranked top out of all 27. The indicators cover things like homelessness, temporary accommodation, affordability of housing, and delivery of new homes and housing association homes. We've got one indicator which seems to show an improvement compared to last year, which is about delivery of housing association owned dwellings, and we've got 3 which appear to show a slight decline, covering supply of generally of new homes, affordability and households in temporary accommodation. So this one may drop slightly when we gather together the figures for the year that's just ended. The next area that I was going to cover is adult social care, and the indicators used to create the performance score here are the 26 adult social care outcomes framework indicators. So they're a defined group of indicators that the government sets for all social service authorities. We are ranked 16th out of 27. However, we are the lowest spending of the county councils on social care per head. So while we're slightly below average in terms of performance, it's not a bad result considering that we're the lowest funded of those authorities. Since last year, we've ascertained that 6 indicators have improved in this theme, but 10 have declined slightly. Those are mainly survey-based indicators, and those declines may not be statistically significant. We think that the overall performance position will probably drop slightly for this indicator when we assess the 17-18 data. The next theme that I was going to touch on was public health, and we've used here 33 indicators that cover public health. They're all drawn from the National Public Health Outcomes Framework, and they cover issues that were priorities in the former council strategic plan, so there are areas that we were trying to work on and improve for Leicestershire. We were ranked 10th overall on public health, while in terms of spending we were 5th from being the lowest spend, so we're still towards the sort of the right hand side in terms of spend. You can see a bit of what might look like a strange sort of correlation here, where the authorities that are spending less appear to be performing better, and the authorities that are spending more appear to be performing worse. But this is more to do with the fact that public health funding tends to follow need, so the areas that have worse health outcomes tend to get more funding. So it's more about that rather than the results of what's been spent. Looking at change over time, we've got 7 indicators that look to have improved covering this theme, and about 6 that have declined in terms of performance. So we're thinking that this year's rank is probably going to be largely similar to where we are now. Looking at children's social care, we've got across the bottom spend per head on children's social care, which is the lowest of the 27 counties. We actually come out third overall in performance terms, so that's quite a strong performance last year for this theme. Since last year, we look to have about 6 indicators that have improved and 6 that are showing lower performance. We think that the overall position may drop slightly when we top things up for 2017-18. And lastly, waste performance. Across the bottom, we've got spend per head on waste management. Quite a sort of mid-table performance here. We're ranked 16th in performance terms for waste management. And in terms of spend per head, we're right there in the middle, 14th out of the 27 two-tier counties. Since last year, we've assessed that 1 indicator has shown improvement and 2 show slightly lower performance. So our overall position may drop slightly for the year that's just ended. And I'll just move back to the presentation slides where I've got a couple of summary views. This chart summarises information from the performance dashboards in the compendium that goes with the annual report. It shows the number of indicators in each performance quartile in 2017-18 compared to 2016-17. The first quartile over here, these are indicators where we perform among the top 25% of two-tier county councils, so we're in the top 7 out of 27. And the fourth or bottom quartile, we're performing in the bottom 25% of those comparator authorities. And overall, you can see here that we've got 66% of indicators are in the above average groupings, the first quartile and the second quartile, whereas we've got 34% in the lower 2 quartiles. There has been a bit of a shift year on year. We've got slightly more indicators in the top quartile, but we've got quite a number of extra ones in the bottom quartile as well. And the next slide summarises improvement between the 2 years, and there is a bit of a change here in the year that's just ended compared to 2016-17. 44% of indicators overall showed an improvement at 2017-18, whereas for 2016-17, 55% of indicators had improved compared to the previous year. And at the other end of the scale, as you would probably imagine, 35% of indicators that we've just sort of produced at the end of the year that's finished showed some sort of deterioration, whereas the previous year it was just 26%. And the last slide that I was just going to pick up quite briefly, we've produced a 5-year crime trend for the county area, covering some key crime types that are covered in the performance dashboards. And the main thing that we can see from here is that particularly over the last 2 years, we've got an increase here in terms of the key types of crime, and particularly sort of total crime at the top of the view. This is part of a national trend. It's not something that's confined to Leicestershire. I think it's probably been fairly well publicised in the media that across the country there has been an upward trend over the last couple of years in reported crime, and it does remain a priority for the area and for the authority. And I'll hand over to Andy.
Just to pick up quickly some final strands and points. So in terms of the second part of the report, we continue to be the lowest funded county council with greater pressures and risks to service delivery as a result, with a particular revenue squeeze on non-children's and adult services. The list of counties listed in the report with serious financial issues continues to grow, and some are now moving to a statutory minimum offer. So it's positive that Leicestershire has been ahead of the curve, taking some difficult decisions and is not in that position. Though critically, the fair funding campaign and a fairer approach is critical now for Leicestershire moving forwards, and everyone needs to get behind that campaign, which could unlock potentially, if our model is adopted, an extra £47 million to support services. At the moment, significant further funding reductions programme to come, an MTFS saving of £50 million, £13 million unidentified, rising demand, particularly around child placement, school places, learning disabilities, SEND, as a result of the ageing population and waste. And there's a refreshed transformation programme and some really difficult service reductions set out on pages 228 to 229 of the report. Perhaps the only positive from having no money is that Empower voted the council, or assessed the council as the most productive council. That is dividing the outcomes and outputs of the council by its funding, and we came out top for the most productive council last year, and I think that will be the case this year. Just to pick up quickly to some high-level service issues and risks. The National Audit Office produced a report in the spring on the sustainability of local authorities, 49% reduction in spending power overall. Sector finances have worsened markedly, particularly those with social care responsibilities, which are not sustainable in the medium term. 10% of authorities have less than 3 years reserves left based on their current use, and there's no long-term government funding plan, and there's a lack of monitoring of the impact of cuts, and there's real risks to services, with the trajectory being a narrow core offer focused on social care. That's the National Audit Office. CIPFA and the Institute for Government produced a report 2 weeks ago focusing on cuts ranging from 39% in libraries to actually an increase around health. Whereas services are distinctly more efficient, there's serious concerns now around the quality of prisons, adult social care and libraries, and also recruitment and retention difficulties. National spending on health is crowding out other spending, and in local areas, spending on social care is crowding out other services such as libraries, waste, trading standards, with more costs being passed on to citizens, and gaps in official data. And also 2 weeks ago, the Care Quality Commission published a report on the state of health and care, with significant continuing challenges in that area, where workforce recruitment problems which are impacting on people's care, fragile adult social care market, unmet need, adult social care services which need to improve. Locally, some providers have had 50% staff turnover levels in adult social care, and 13% require improvement, which is better than the national average, but still an area of focus. And in terms of children's services, a £2 billion funding gap, in-year overspends, pressures on prevention budgets, high demands, child mental health issues fueled by social media, increased children in care locally. There has been significant investment in the post-Ofsted action plan with a focus on enhanced staffing and quality, and Ofsted did have a focused visit in Leicestershire 2 weeks ago and have picked up some improvements in quality and delivery in that area, which is a real positive. But there's considerable issues still to be tackled through that improvement plan. Pressures on the special educational needs and disabilities high needs block, and increased education, health and care plans. And also we're monitoring closely issues around welfare assistance and homelessness, which feed across into sort of family pressures on children's social services. And so quickly, just to draw that together in terms of the areas of continued focus that are recommended to the Cabinet, the fair funding campaign clearly is a really important aspect moving forward to seek more sustainable funding for local services, implementing the single outcomes framework and associated plans, including the new housing approach we mentioned, the community strategy, industrial strategy work, and a focus on wellbeing, delivery of the MTFS and transformation programme, and other major efficiency initiatives will be absolutely critical to maintain the Council's ability to deliver. The stronger commercial focus and digital delivery, and the various plans underway in relation to that. Partnership working with the PCC to tackle reductions in overall crime. Children's Social Care Improvement Plan I've mentioned. The Adult Social Care Green Paper and sustainable funding, critical for adult social care moving forwards, particularly around the quality side. A variety of public health challenges, obesity, diabetes, mental health particularly, and the impact on people's well-being. Waste plans delivery, we have seen a small reduction in waste performance this year. There are plans in place to tackle that. County Council staff, sickness absence, health and well-being, extra resources gone into that area to help people with some of the pressures of work. Overall public satisfaction, we have seen a slight reduction in public satisfaction through our surveys this year, driven by a number of factors, some increase in council tax levels, some high-profile reductions in services. And also we know there's a feed across between district council issues and county council issues from previous work we've done. So sort of things like bin collection rates, which changes their impact on the county council satisfaction. So that is another area we are monitoring closely. So we're continuing to enhance our intelligence and feedback arrangements so we can react and respond to particular issues as they come forward. And clearly the feedback members get in communities, and your postbags is fairly critical to that, so that the council can react to the situation that we are in.
Okay, thank you very much. I think that's a very comprehensive report, and it has, the focus I think has changed to, I think it used to be a little bit self-congratulating, and I think it's now much more realistic of the situation the council is in, and you really have highlighted the financial pressures and the realities. So although it has positive things in of things that we're taking forward, it's always the resource issue and ability to deliver is there all the time. So I think it is a different report now than it perhaps was 2 or 3 years ago. The focus on that. Opening up for members, the one that it's not directly our responsibility, but the one that really does shock me in some of the percentage increases is crime. Now you're saying this is a trend, but I mean just picking out some of the individual offences on 274, burglary rates, vehicle crime 15%, public order offences 66%, reported crime with injury offences 39% with violence. So there's some really quite concerning figures there. Now you say that's just part of a trend across the country, Richard, but you've dwelt down here into the individual crimes. Is there anything standing out in Leicestershire in those individual crimes where there's something going on more than the national trend?
It's not really my area of expertise, but I would comment on page 274. There are 4 areas there where we fall within the 4th quartile or the bottom quartile compared to the other county councils, and they're burglary, theft, other and vehicle offences. So I'd suggest they're probably areas that are particularly concerning. I think some of the other areas, while we have seen a sort of increase in crime, we still do perform quite well compared to other areas. So I'd say those 3 areas look
just to remind members, although we don't directly hold the PCC to account here, that's done in a separate body. We are the council's statutory scrutiny committee that we have to have for crime and disorders. So we do have a responsibility to monitor this and look to take action. Or certainly to work with others to address this, and I find this very worrying.
Question, just this figure here, is it just for Leicestershire or is it the whole of the police force area, including the city and Rutland?
These are just Leicestershire county figures.
So you've pulled these out of the overall police figures, as it were, for the police force area? Yeah, okay, right. Alan?
Just we've done. You've said it's not a peer review. It's our own self in-house. Okay. Sometimes I wonder the value of. I know it's nice to monitor, but how we see it, how we monitor it. How do we link in with the government rank? Because the government rank have us dropping down from 29 to 51. So then that's 2018. Their figures. So I don't know how we link with that. Are we linked? How do they do it? That's just one of the issues. Just how we get our figures. I'd like to know how they get their figures, so I can, as a member, I could compare and see what we're doing and what they're looking at. Is that all right? Because it is what they're saying is slightly different to what we're having being delivered here. Secondly, very keen on the commercial. I think this would be here. I think. Would you deal with investment, or is that the next one? Have we got something else on investment here? That's commercial, isn't it? We had a 37.5 million investment. We've received 5.6 or 2.1 million, I think, profit or we gained on that. I'd like more information on that. Is that before or afterwards staff time? How that performance with anybody else? How does that link? Could we invest it somewhere else better and get better percentages? I think if we're going to commercial, I think we want commercial feedback so we can read it, because I know some members here have got commercial heads and they would be able to analyse it. So I'd like a little more information on exactly what we're doing commercially and some of the returns and some of the risk and etc. Is that okay? Okay, thank you.
Right, I'll get a few questions in and then you can respond at the end. Terry Einan.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I wanted to comment that having the two reports has been really helpful, because I think previously, as the Chairman has rightly said, it all looked a bit kind of gushing, and having that second report that really tells it like it is, and what we're up against, I think is really helpful. And obviously we're not scrutinising perhaps each bit of detail, but I do want to praise what's gone on with the things I've been involved with, like managing sickness absence, things I'm bothered about like autism education, and a lot of praise for the communities team and the local area coordinators. I think they're doing a really good job in my patch. Things I wanted to think perhaps I wanted to make some connections for things we might want to scrutinise further at other points. I think affordable homes has come up a few times, and I think that's a really difficult and knotty issue. On page 194, apparently we have an increasing number of children home educated, 500 of them. From my knowledge of parents who are home educating their children, it is largely due to the failure of the education service to meet their child's needs. And on page 233, we point that there's a black hole in community services. As far as I'm aware, there is absolutely nothing in the way of mental health services for children below top tier. And of course, to get into the top tier at CAMS, you've got to have a child who's very, very seriously ill. So there's a whole load of stuff that we're not really managing, and I'm sure the CYPS would like to have a look at that better and see whether home education is actually covering a multitude of sins. Safeguarding inquiries, 675 safeguarding inquiries in care homes. Should I be connecting that with the section on page 231 that talks about difficulties of recruiting staff with the right values? Well, I think it's very difficult to recruit staff with the right values when they are generally so lowly paid and exploited. It must be very difficult for them. So that may be something A&C will want to look at. And then a very easy one, I suppose, page 24, investment in solar energy. Is this going to be a good idea now that we have a government that's cutting support to renewables, and we're going to be losing feed-in tariffs?
Right. I haven't got anyone else, so I'll ask the officers to respond to some of those points.
Thank you. Yes, in terms of government ranking of local authorities, I'll be certainly interested to look at the ranking that has been mentioned. I've not seen an official ranking by government of local authorities. There's a variety of different ranking schemes that you do see come out in the press based on local areas with various degrees of sort of rigour and validity attached to them. The most authoritative one for local government is the Local Government Association LGA Informed Benchmarking System, which is an online system which draws on national data. But it does take quite a while for that national data to translate through, and it is fairly limited, so it's not of the scale of the information you're getting here today that's published nationally. But I'm certainly always interested in looking at those rankings and seeing how Leicestershire compares and what that tells us. So I'm happy to do that outside the meeting. Commercial information, it is a really big theme now. There's a lot of plans underway around commercial. I think it would be worth something the Commission looks at separately if you haven't looked at that area before. So clearly that is something you want to look at moving forward, and Mr Wilkinson leading that that strand across the authority in terms of areas of commercial delivery, profitability, risk, because clearly we are moving into a new area in some cases on commercial delivery. Safeguarding inquiries, that's a good point. It's sort of the same question I've been asking around safeguarding and what's happening and the nature of those inquiries. And we've been doing some work with adults and communities to understand that in a bit more detail, to look at the information we've got and to follow that up. So I haven't got any conclusions, but we're certainly looking at that area. And solar energy will certainly take that point back to the team leading on that.
Okay. Nobody else?
Yeah, I have
sorry, Rosie.
Just one quick one. In previous years, we had our transport plan 1 and 2. Sorry, Ian, it's you again. And one of our priorities was to combat poor air quality. And one of the last scrutiny meetings where we had public health, they painted quite a poor picture of air quality related issues. So I was just wondering, why isn't air quality an issue anymore in our services? Why don't we highlight that anymore? Because I think it's quite important.
You're absolutely right. Air quality is an issue. There is a report from the Director of Public Health coming forward shortly, and that will pick up the issue of air quality. There are some plans around that, which is covered in that report. So you're quite correct, and I'll add that into the list of issues.
Just saying that it is. We've asked for a report. I mean, Ian's just reminding me, to be honest. He's just gone, Alan. We're asking a report to the scrutiny. Transport and environment. So yeah, we asked for that report. So that this is when scrutiny works. So we're getting feedback, which is quite good.
So thank you. If you're adding that in, it will be greatly appreciated. Thank you.
Did you want to comment in?
Just to add, Alan was very inquisitive on air quality. I'm thinking of the right words. Basically, he was demanding an awful lot of how we bring forward in the new year a comprehensive report covering air quality, because we've had an awful lot of work being done on easing congestion, some of the things that we picked up here, and of course the responsibilities for air qualities lie across many different bodies, and there are many people who are involved in it, from public health to ourselves as transport to the districts on planning. So we're going to bring a piece of work which will be almost a tour de force of everything air quality, and probably what we see as a larger emerging issue going forward for our department, but others to deliver, which will also fit under the environment strategy, which was recently launched.
Oh, thanks for
Can I sorry, just add to that, Chair? Sorry, but it is important. I mean, what we're discovering is we're all aware of this, the air quality, the impact it has on health at schools. Some schools that are closer to poor air quality perform poorer. So it's a real major issue for us. And once again, one of the relief road in Melton is a godsend, because actually you can hardly breathe in a place in the middle of the country like Melton in a rural area. It's bonkers that we're being gassed through trucks coming through. So this report is really valid, what I'm saying is it's good to see that we've seen it, we know the problem, and we're actually doing something about it. And I think that's where the scrutiny works well. Thank you.
Okay, right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Right, we'll just change the top table now. Revenue Budget and Capital Programme Monitoring Report.
Sorry.
Period 6. Sorry.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, I have to go. I've got 2 previous meetings.
Okay. Yeah.
Thank you.
I don't think we're going to be long now.
Thank you.
Thank you. We've got Chris Tambini, Director of Corporate Resources, Jason Firth. Chris, you're going to lead off on period 6?
Yeah, I must admit, I'm conscious that you've been going for about 3.5 hours. I'm just thinking, particularly on the budget monitoring one, is you had a report in September that's pretty similar to this one, and I just wondered if you want to launch straight into questions or if you want an introduction.
Am I right in thinking there's no significant changes since you last reported? Having read the report, I couldn't see anything. Do you want to highlight anything? One thing you might comment on is this issue of the DSG and having to seek, paragraph 10, having to seek authority from the schools forum. When does that happen in terms of planning for this overspend?
On the SEN DSG overspend, that has increased slightly, not that much, only slightly, by a couple 100,000, I think, since the last period. That there has already been a discussion at the schools forum, and they've broadly accepted the overall kind of strategy and plan that we're going to put in place. We're kind of formulating that in a bit more detail, and I anticipate that probably scrutiny after Christmas, the budget scrutiny, we'll look at that in a bit more detail, and it'll probably go back to schools forum around that time as well.
But that's the only significant change you want to highlight.
That's the only other one is we've got some extra money from government for winter pressures, 2.4 million, and that's reflected in the extra income you can see coming in through the line about 2/3 of the way down, and we've kind of parked that within revenue funding the capital at the moment, but we're working with the health service about exactly how we're going to spend that.
Right, thank you. Any questions? Revenue monitoring? Okay, just paragraph 23. I mean, you might not know this, but if I can get it out. Why are rigid plastics now having to go to landfill? The China thing.
I was going to guess China, but I'd have to go back and check and just see.
Mr. Wyatt's gone now, but I do know he's had some correspondence from people that are concerned that when they're taking things to household waste sites, are being told by the guys there, oh, well, you know, don't bother recycling, it's going to end up in landfill. The plastic I'm talking about now, there is a concern. Nationally, I mean, there's stuff going on nationally, isn't there, about the ability to get this stuff recycled.
Again, the report at my committee is, of course, that some of the plastic now they're not purchasing, they don't want anymore. So therefore, they don't want it. We've got nowhere to put it. So it's simple as that. There's not a cost in it. So in fact, the LCC have got a very good. I don't know if you've done it yet. Where they give you an option to what you save and throw away, and it's changed dramatically over the past few years. So it's no fault of our own. It's just that the cost of plastics and what they want and don't want has changed completely, and it is affecting how we dispose of plastics.
But that is, I mean, we're here to look at the finance. The financial consequence of that is that we're paying more to dispose of it by other means.
Correct. That is the whole issue. You know, we're not getting revenue, correct, from as we put in the past.
We have had a slight impact in terms of plastics, but not to the extent that you've read in the press about other local authorities. So there's been a bit of an impact, but not a major impact. So you can kind of see the waste position hasn't deteriorated that much. So we are kind of managing it.
Okay. No other questions? Anything you want to say on capital?
Nothing really to add to the report.
Right. Any questions on the capital programme? All happy with that? Right. So that then takes us to the final report, which is we've had the last year. This is the second time I think we've had this, looking at the earmarked reserves, so that members can track and see where earmarked reserves occur and what we are proposing to spend them on. Do you want to just do a quick introduction on this one, Chris?
Yeah, I'll do a very quick kind of gallop through. The report's kind of split between kind of revenue and capital. So on the revenue reserve earmarked funds, you can kind of see there's lots of small amounts that relate to lots of different kind of areas. The biggest one is around transformation, 10.7 million. I envisage that there will be a transformation earmarked fund for a number of years yet to come. So that is the biggest one, and I think we'll continue to put a great deal of investment into transformation over the next few years. In terms of capital, there's been quite a change over recent years. We've now got significant capital funds, and a lot of that relates to the fact that the demands on the capital programme are significant around infrastructure, etc. But also because we have a kind of not a no borrowing policy, but we aim not to borrow. So hence we kind of save up money to invest in capital expenditure. And it's kind of split between two key areas. One is capital financing. So if you look at paragraph 45, that 55.5 million. And those funds are there to support the actual projects that are within the approved capital programme. So they're kind of clearly going to be spent on the programme. The future developments pot, 36.6 million, paragraph 46. That's there to fund the kind of whole list of projects that we know that are coming along the tracks. And we kind of think, again, looking at paragraph 48, that that could be well over £100 million. So what we're doing is trying to put some money aside for projects that we know we're going to have to fund. Again, a lot of those are significant infrastructure projects. They could include things like supported living. And then once those schemes are being kind of appropriately developed, then they'll slot into the capital programme, and we'll have the funding there to kind of fund them. The final thing I'll mention around reserves is paragraph 51. We mentioned the overspend on SEN, and you can kind of see that there's now anticipated to be a negative DSG reserve in terms of SEN. Now, a negative reserve isn't actually that positive, because it means you've got negative money. So what we're actually doing there is carrying forward a negative balance. And we need to get approval of the schools forum to actually do that, which we'll put that in place. I am concerned around the risks around SEN, and I'll say the programme of work is there to try and rectify that position. But we are going to try and back out that risk, and we are going to kind of recommend that we actually increase some of the funding within the county fund to back out that risk. Because although we're overspending by a bit over £3 million this year, I anticipate that is going to grow next year just because of the sheer numbers of children that are coming through with SEN.
Right, okay, so that's clearly one to keep an eye on. So in terms of that fund then, what you would be saying is that we would, top that fund up from somewhere else, or just make provision in the general reserves?
The plan that we're pulling together includes investment, but it shows the overspend on SEN kind of increasing for a couple of years. And then as we manage to kind of reduce the number of children that go into some of these high cost placements in terms of private independent schools, the actual overspend comes down, and we actually eat into that negative reserve. So over a kind of 4 or 5 year period, the plan is that we balance it out. Clearly there are risks around that. The demand could be higher than we're anticipating. So we just need to be kind of careful that we don't store up a big problem in terms of having a large negative reserve that in effect we have to finance at some future point. So I am kind of considering how we do that, and at the moment I think we just need to add some money to the county fund to manage that risk.
Okay, so the suggested solution to this in the long term is what we've talked about before, of looking to have more in-county or more local specialised provision, and children and families are working on that. In fact, I think there's a board, isn't there, a group of officers looking at this. Is there a timescale to have a report on that, and what that form that might take?
I think it'll be similar to what I mentioned earlier. So I think you'll get a more detailed consideration at scrutiny kind of after Christmas, and we will make mention it in terms of the MTFS that goes to Cabinet in December as well.
Thank you very much. Any questions on the reserves? Alan?
Yeah, just the SEN. How do we link into one of the issues has been over the years is the statements. Who makes the statements? There are people that really need support, and there's those that in the past, as a governor, chair of governor of the school, I'm surprised who gets it and who doesn't get it sometimes. Do we link it into that? Because how are we influencing? Are we learning from mistakes made or whatever? Is there anything we can do?
Again, I'm not an expert on this, but there are 2 planks to the plan. So one is around managing the demand, which is you're talking about, and there will be some work done about how we do that. And clearly, the partnerships with schools is key on this. I know Jane Moore is kind of working closely with schools through the schools forum to kind of make sure that plan is managed well. And the second part is kind of the provision. So once the children have been assessed and we know they need provision, is about getting them in the most kind of cost-effective kind of placements possible.
Yes, very quick one, Chris. Supporting family grants are coming to an end, 2021. Now, this is a grant that goes across all the authority pay in, the PCC pays in. However, if that service stops, there will be an awful lot of associated negative impact. Are we already looking at it? Are we already trying to feature that into how we're going to deal with that? Because surely it's going to provide a financial risk to us if this isn't carried on, if you see what I'm trying to see. So can you try to give me an answer on that, please?
Yeah, you're right. The money does. Well, we think the money does come to an end. What we've done in terms of the MTFS is we put aside, I think it was 2 or 2.5 million, about £2 million, which allows that programme to continue for a couple of years. And I think what we need to do is assess, once the comprehensive spending review is published next year, about whether the government are going to continue this programme or a different programme, and then have a think about how. So in effect, we put the money there to buy this, gives us a bit more time so we can make a more sensible decision when we know what the national landscape looks like.
That's really good news. Thank you.
Right, if there's no other questions, I will thank Chris and Jason for coming in this morning. Sorry you had quite a long wait. That completes our business this morning. Just to point out, our next meeting is on the 14th of November. Now, like many of you, that is obviously focused on the unitary status issue, and like a number of you, there's been a lot of emails and letters flying around. I have spoken to the deputy leader, and what I've been told is that we should carry on with this process. Now, some of you obviously will question that, have some concerns about that, but at this point in time, that meeting on the 14th of November at 10 o'clock is going ahead. And until I hear otherwise, I'm in the hands of the administration on this issue. There are scrutiny meetings taking place next week, which the agendas have already gone out, and they are going ahead as well. So until something happens, other than what I've been advised by the deputy leader, we will continue to do our job as scrutiny, and I will see you on the 14th of November. Thank you.